The sea was silent that night. Only the soft hiss of foam broke the stillness, glowing faintly beneath the newborn stars. Then movement, a tremor beneath the surface, as if the ocean itself exhaled. Out of the water rose a figure so radiant that even the moon paused to watch. Her hair was spun gold, her eyes like the horizon at dawn. Yet she was not born of love. She was born of violence. From the severed sky and the blood of a fallen god, beauty itself took form. Her name would outlast empires, Aphrodite, the goddess of desire and the reason even immortals trembled. For from her would come both tenderness and ruin, the sweetest kiss and the deepest wound. But who was she really? A savior of the heart, or its eternal tormentor? Tonight, as the tides whisper her origin, we travel through ages, where beauty and war, tenderness and tragedy, became one. This is the entire story of Aphrodite, the goddess who taught gods and mortals alike that love was never gentle, only inevitable. Before there was beauty, there was silence. Before there was love, there was a wound in the sky. The first age of the cosmos was ruled by Uranus, the vast sky, whose embrace smothered Gaia, the earth. She bore his children endlessly, giants, furies, and gods still unshaped by time. But Uranus, fearing their power, imprisoned them within her depths. Night after night, Gaia groaned beneath his weight, her cries swallowed by the stars. And from that pain, she conceived a thought darker than the void: revenge. In the black soil she shaped a weapon, a curved sickle of adamant, sharp enough to cut heaven itself. Her sons trembled, but one stepped forward. Cronus, bold and cold. "I will strike," he said, "and free the world from endless night." When Uranus descended once more, the ambush came swift. The blade flashed, the sky screamed, and in one motion creation itself split apart. From that divine wound spilled not blood, but light, thick, luminous, immortal. It fell into the endless sea below, hissing and writhing like fire meeting water. The waves churned with celestial foam, and from their union something began to take shape. The ocean shimmered with a strange calm, as if holding its breath. From the foam, a figure emerged, soft, luminous, yet terrifying in her perfection. She was not a child of life, but of vengeance. The gods would later call her Aphrodite, she who rose from the foam. Far above, the heavens closed their wound, but something in the order of the cosmos had shifted. A new force had entered existence, one neither god nor mortal could master. It was not war, it was not wisdom, it was desire, unreasoning, radiant, unstoppable. As she drifted toward the horizon, the winds of the west gathered around her, Zephyrus himself, the gentlest of breezes. He bore her across the waves upon a shell of pearl, toward the shores of Cyprus, where the hours of the seasons awaited her with golden robes. Everywhere she passed, the sea blossomed with color. Shells gleamed like stars. Birds sang though there was no dawn. The world, for the first time, blushed. But even as creation rejoiced, Olympus fell silent. The gods watched from their thrones as this newborn goddess stepped upon the sand, radiant, calm, and utterly unknowable. No thunder announced her, no prophecy named her, and yet every heart stirred as if remembering a feeling older than time. Zeus himself, ruler of the sky, frowned, for he knew what the poets would one day write, that nothing destroys kingdoms faster than love. He whispered to Hera, "Even beauty must be bound, or all will unravel." And far below, Aphrodite opened her eyes. They reflected neither sky nor sea, but something deeper, something that promised both joy and ruin. She smiled, and the world began to change. The wind carried her name across islands and mountains, and already, temples began to rise in her honor. Mortals dreamed of her before they even knew she existed. Somewhere, even the fates stirred, three weavers pausing as if to admire a new thread that glowed among their gray. And yet, no one could foresee what that thread would cost. For from the wound of heaven came not only beauty, but the eternal struggle between passion and restraint, between creation and destruction. And in that struggle, the story of gods and mortals would be rewritten. Was Aphrodite truly born to bless the world, or to remind it that even paradise begins with pain? The storm had passed. Only the soft sway of the sea remained, golden beneath the early light. There, upon the foam, she drifted, a figure unlike anything born before. Not mortal, not beast, not divine in any known shape. She was becoming. The waves cradled her gently, as if the sea itself were reluctant to let her go. The white foam curled around her limbs, sculpting form from light. Each ripple smoothed her skin. Each breath of wind traced her outline. The sea gave her body. The sky lent her glow. And when she opened her eyes, dawn itself seemed to hesitate. Zephyrus, the god of the western wind, hovered close, his wings trembling. He had carried gods before, but never one who made even the air feel shy. "The foam has birthed a secret," he murmured. Beside him, his lover Chloris scattered blossoms across the tide, the first roses to ever touch salt water. As they guided her toward the shore, petals followed in their wake. The scent of myrrh rose from the foam, and doves circled overhead. Every living thing felt her arrival, not through sight, but through a sudden ache within the heart, a longing so sharp it could almost be mistaken for pain. When her feet touched sand, flowers erupted from beneath her steps. Crocus, hyacinth, wild poppy. The hours, daughters of Zeus, keepers of the seasons, awaited her on the beach of Cyprus, their robes glimmering with dew. With gentle hands they wrapped her in gold-threaded silk, whispering names in languages the world no longer remembers. They crowned her with woven roses and led her toward a grove of laurels where the sea met the land. Above, Olympus stirred. The new goddess had arrived, and her beauty was such that even Hera's jealousy faltered into awe. Apollo paused mid-song. Athena's hands trembled upon her spear. For beauty in its truest form is not peace, it is disruption. Zeus, seated upon his throne of storm clouds, watched her with measured calm. "Another child of chaos," he said softly. Poseidon smiled. "Yet this one does not roar," she whispers. But Zeus's gaze darkened. He could already feel it. A new force spreading through the cosmos, invisible but undeniable. Mortals would one day call it love, yet it would bend kings, betray empires, and shape destinies more powerfully than any lightning bolt. "She must be given a place," Zeus decreed. "If left unbound, she will undo us all." So the gods descended to greet her, one by one, each unable to look away. Hermes bowed first, words caught in his throat. Hera offered a cold smile. Athena's silence spoke volumes. But when Aphrodite looked at them, her gaze was soft, almost curious. She did not yet know power. She only radiated it. "Who are you?" asked Apollo. "I am what you cannot name," she answered gently, and her voice rippled through their minds like music heard underwater. It was then that the hours placed upon her the girdle, a band woven from starlight and gold. Within it pulsed a strange magic, the power to draw hearts together, to awaken desire, to make the indifferent ache for connection. It was not a gift, it was a responsibility. In the following days, Olympus watched as Aphrodite explored her new world. She walked through gardens of ambrosia and pearl-lit halls, touching every flower as if remembering them from another life. The gods whispered among themselves, uncertain whether to fear or adore her. Hephaestus, the quiet smith, watched from afar. His hands, scarred by flame, stilled upon the anvil. For even he, a god who cared only for craft, felt his chest tighten. Yet it was not lust, nor envy. It was awe. How can something so perfect exist without shattering? He wondered. On earth, mortals began to dream. Fishermen in Cyprus claimed to see a glow beneath the waves. Shepherds spoke of a woman walking at dusk, her hair trailing light. In their sleep, they saw visions of beauty so pure it brought them to tears. They built small altars of seashells and flowers, not knowing her name, only that something divine had touched their hearts. Meanwhile, in Olympus's council chamber, Zeus convened the gods. "This cannot continue," he said. Desire must be governed. If unchecked, it will tear the order apart. Poseidon chuckled. And who shall govern her, brother? You, or one of us? Zeus's eyes narrowed.
No.
She must be bound, not in punishment, but in harmony. We will give her to Hephaestus. He is steady, gentle, harmless to the throne. The decree was made. The goddess of love would be wedded to the god of fire, beauty bound to imperfection. When Hermes brought her the message, Aphrodite did not speak. She only looked toward the sea, her reflection rippling softly. The waves that had birthed her whispered warnings she could not quite understand. And for the first time her smile faltered. That night, as the stars gathered above Olympus, she stood alone on the balcony of her golden palace. The wind lifted her hair, and in its whisper she heard something ancient, the memory of her birth, the foam, the light, the blood of Uranus mingling with salt and tide, a creation born not of tenderness, but of severance. She understood, in that moment, that beauty would never bring her peace, for wherever it shone, shadows followed. Still, she turned toward the horizon, toward the sea that once cradled her, and whispered, "If I am to be bound, let it be by my own choosing someday." The moon watched in silence as she vanished into her chambers, unaware that the next dawn would bind her heart to a god of flame and forge, and that, from that union, Olympus would never be the same. Was this the beginning of her destiny, or the quiet curse hidden beneath her perfection? The light over Olympus changed that morning. It was not the dawn that stirred the heavens, but the murmur of the gods. Somewhere below, the newly born goddess of beauty prepared for a wedding she had not chosen. Zeus sat upon his throne of thunder, the scent of storm clinging to the air. Around him, the assembly glittered. Athena, stern and silent. Hera, radiant yet cold. Apollo, thoughtful and half-smiling. At their center stood Aphrodite, her eyes calm but distant, as though her thoughts still floated somewhere upon the waves of Cyprus. "Daughter of foam," said Zeus, his voice rolling through marble halls. "Your beauty is a flame that could set the world ablaze. To keep the order of gods and men, you shall be joined to Hephaestus, the craftsman of Olympus. Through him, your fire will be tempered." A ripple of surprise crossed the gathering. Some gods smiled, others pitied the match. Hephaestus, bent and scarred from his fall long ago, lowered his gaze. His hands, blackened by years of forging divine armor, tightened around his hammer. He had never expected a throne beside the goddess of desire. Aphrodite inclined her head.
No protest, no tremor.
Only a faint breath that sounded almost like the sea. Inside, however, something shifted. An ache, not of defiance, but of awakening. The chains Zeus placed upon her were not forged of iron, but of expectation. The wedding was swift. The muses sang. Doves circled above. Nectar flowed. Laughter echoed. Yet even amid the revelry, a silence followed her wherever she moved. The gods praised her beauty, but none dared meet her eyes for long. To behold her too deeply was to risk remembering something dangerous. Longing. When the feast ended, Hephaestus led her to the chambers of flame. The walls glowed amber from molten streams, and strange flowers of metal bloomed along the shelves. He turned to her awkwardly. "I have little grace, my lady, but I can build anything your heart desires." Aphrodite looked around the glowing cavern. "Then build me something no one has ever seen." Hephaestus frowned. "What would that be?" "A cage," she whispered. "Invisible, the kind that none can see yet everyone feels." Hephaestus hesitated, uncertain if it was jest or prophecy. But she smiled, and the tension softened. He began to work at once, hammer striking anvil in rhythms that echoed through Olympus. Sparks leapt like falling stars. Each sound carried into the night, and from those sparks came the inventions of passion. Jewels, ornaments, the golden girdle that could melt the will of any who gazed upon it. Days turned to weeks. Aphrodite wandered through Olympus, her new home a labyrinth of beauty and restraint. Mortals below began to sense her presence. Dreams of yearning spread across the Aegean. Couples woke in tears, unable to name what they longed for. Priests built her altars beside springs, offering shells and oil to the unseen mistress of affection. Yet within the palace, another pair of eyes followed her. Ares, god of war, stood at the balcony of his bronze fortress, watching the goddess of peace move through the gardens of fire. Where Hephaestus's touch was steady, Ares's heart burned like battle. He saw not gentleness but challenge. To him, love and war were not opposites. They were twin storms born from the same lightning. One evening, as twilight fell over the mountain, Aphrodite walked the colonnade alone. The air shimmered with heat. From the shadows, Ares emerged, his armor glowing red in the setting sun. "Does the goddess of love walk without guard?" he asked, voice low, more wind than sound. "Love fears no blade," she replied. "Then why do you look toward the sea each night?" Her eyes lifted toward the horizon, where the faint shimmer of foam still glowed. "Because it remembers me," she said. Ares stepped closer. "Does your husband remember you?" The question hung like thunder before the strike. She met his gaze, and for a heartbeat the air itself seemed to hold its breath. In that silence, the fate of Olympus tilted. The god of war and the goddess of desire, opposites that, once joined, could ignite eternity. But somewhere far above, Zeus stirred uneasily. For even kings know, no decree can cage the force that binds hearts against their will. As the stars blinked awake, Aphrodite turned away, her voice a whisper swallowed by dusk. "Even the gods," she said, "will learn that love does not ask permission." And though no one saw, Ares smiled. The first spark of rebellion had been struck, not in battlefields, but in the quiet between two breaths. Was the goddess's union truly a safeguard? Or had Zeus just armed Olympus with its most dangerous weapon? Night in Olympus is never silent. Even when the stars sleep, the palace hums with the breath of immortals. The whisper of wings, the sigh of winds, the pulse of hidden hearts. And somewhere beyond the marble halls, a forbidden rhythm began to form. Aphrodite stood by her balcony, the light of the forge flickering below. From the depths, Hephaestus worked tirelessly, his hammer echoing like thunder caught in a cage. Each strike was a promise of loyalty, each spark, a lonely star. She watched him with pity, not disdain. His devotion was flawless, but love was never born from perfection. It needed chaos, danger, pulse. Beyond the garden walls, that chaos waited. Ares, son of Zeus and Hera, god of war and storm. He had watched her from the moment she stepped ashore, drawn not by her beauty alone but by the defiance that shimmered beneath her calm. He understood destruction. She understood desire. They were two edges of the same blade. When their eyes met across the temple courtyard, the air seemed to darken. Neither spoke. Yet in that silence, 1,000 unspoken vows took shape. That night, she found herself wandering toward the training fields where Ares sparred alone. The clang of his sword rang through the darkness. When he turned, his gaze burned brighter than any forge. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "Neither should you," she answered. Their words collided, soft but sharp. He stepped closer until the air between them trembled. The scent of bronze, the warmth of breath. The world seemed to shrink to the space of a heartbeat. "Do you know what they call me?" Ares asked, voice like gravel under flame. "The bringer of death," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "And you, the reason men fight." The god of war laughed, low, disbelieving. "Then perhaps we are kin." Aphrodite reached out, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Or perhaps we are the same." The night wind shifted. Somewhere above, Hera's peacocks cried. The sound fell into silence. Ares bent toward her. The first kiss was not tender. It was an explosion, the meeting of storm and sea. Sparks danced across the air. The heavens held their breath. From that moment, the boundaries of Olympus began to blur. They met in secret chambers, behind the marble columns, beneath the shade of sacred olive trees. The doves that once sang for her now carried messages across the skies. And every time she returned to Hephaestus's hall, She carried the scent of battle on her skin. But passion leaves traces. One evening, Helios, the all-seeing sun, spotted them entwined beneath a golden net of twilight. Shocked, he carried word to Hephaestus. The smith god's heart turned to stone. Yet instead of wrath, he felt the quiet precision of a craftsman planning his final work. In his forge, he shaped threads finer than silk, stronger than diamond. He wove them into an invisible net, a trap that no god could break. "Let truth be my revenge," he murmured. Days later, he invited the lovers to rest upon his bed. Its sheets spun from molten gold. They laughed, unaware. When the net dropped, it bound them instantly, writhing, luminous, helpless. Hephaestus summoned the gods to witness. "Behold," he cried, "the queen of beauty and the lord of war." Laughter roared through Olympus. Poseidon wept tears of mirth. Apollo covered his face. Even Zeus smirked. Yet in Aphrodite's eyes, no shame, only fury. Ares struggled against the net, but she whispered, "Do not fight. Let them see." And they did. They saw not humiliation, but the terrible intimacy of power, how love and war shared the same heartbeat. When Hephaestus finally released them, Aphrodite rose, her dignity intact. The laughter of the gods faded, uneasy, for though they mocked her, they also feared her. That night, Aphrodite stood again by the sea. The moon reflected on the waves like shattered glass. She felt no regret. "They can bind our bodies," she said softly, "but never the flame." Behind her, Ares approached, silent. "Do you regret this?" She turned to him. "Love is not peace, Ares. It is victory and ruin, and I would rather burn than sleep." Their hands met once more, and the wind carried their vow across the mountains. A whisper that would outlive even Olympus. That passion, once awakened, cannot be contained by law or laughter. But as the gods turned away, plotting and murmuring, one question echoed through eternity. Was this the birth of love as we know it, or the beginning of its downfall? The laughter of Olympus lingered long after the trap was gone. It rolled down the marble halls like thunder in the distance, a cruel music that even the wind carried. Yet beneath that sound, something darker pulsed. Fascination. For every god who mocked Aphrodite secretly envied the very power they ridiculed. The morning after her humiliation, the goddess of love stood before her mirror of burnished bronze. Her reflection shimmered in the torchlight, beautiful and unbroken. Around her, whispers rippled through the palace. Athena's cold disapproval, Hera's hidden satisfaction, Apollo's laughter that did not quite reach his eyes. Even the muses dared not meet her gaze. But Aphrodite did not tremble. The net had not bound her spirit. It had only taught her what she already suspected. Love, when witnessed, becomes spectacle, and spectacle breeds control. Far below, Hephaestus hammered at his forge, each strike a heartbeat of bitterness. He had meant to shame her. Instead, he had freed her from pretense. For the first time, she understood the weapon she truly carried. Not beauty itself, but what beauty made others feel. Want, envy, hunger, powerlessness. In the mortal world, her story spread like dawn across the sea. Poets whispered of her scandal, yet their verses made her only more adored. Fishermen carved her likeness into shells. Kings hung her image in their courts, believing a glimpse of her could bring victory. The goddess who had been trapped became legend. That evening, she appeared before the council of gods uninvited. The air stilled as she entered, her gown the color of wine, her hair catching the light like flame on water. She spoke softly, but her voice carried to every corner of the chamber. "Tell me," she said, "what did you see when Hephaestus revealed me?" Poseidon chuckled. "Two fools caught in a net." "And yet," she replied, "you still remember." A murmur rippled through the hall. Apollo leaned forward, intrigued. "You turned disgrace into poetry, Aphrodite." "How?" "Because," she said, "what you mock, you magnify. You feed the fire you try to smother." Even Hera, proud, unyielding Hera, shifted uneasily. She recognized something in that tone, power disguised as humility. From that day, the laughter ceased. No one dared jest about the goddess of beauty again, for every smile she gave seemed to mirror their own desires back at them, and not all of those desires were pure. When she left the hall, Ares waited in the shadows. "You've turned shame into worship," he said. "Not shame," she corrected. "Perspective." He smiled. "And what perspective is that?" "That no god or mortal can chain what they crave. They only worship it in secret." For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them hummed with the same tension as before, dangerous, electric, alive. Ares reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then let them worship," he said. But Aphrodite only smiled. "They already do." Days later, she descended to the mortal realm once more, to the island of Paphos, where flowers grew brighter beneath her footsteps. She saw lovers quarrel, reconcile, and weep. She saw jealousy birth wars and tenderness end them. And she realized her influence no longer needed Olympus. It thrived wherever hearts beat. On her return, even Zeus watched her differently. "Her beauty," he murmured to Hera, "has become wisdom." Hera frowned. "Wisdom or weapon?" "Perhaps both," Zeus said. In the quiet of her chambers, Aphrodite stood by the window overlooking the clouds. She thought of Hephaestus, his sorrow, his strength, his unspoken forgiveness. She thought of Ares, burning and restless. And she thought of herself, a being born from the sea yet fated to rule hearts that break as easily as waves. She lifted her hand and traced her reflection upon the glass. "They call me the goddess of love," she whispered, "but they forget that love has many shapes: devotion, jealousy, obsession, rage. I am all of them." The wind answered with the faint echo of laughter. Not mockery this time, but something softer, almost reverent. Even the gods, it seemed, had begun to fear the silence that followed her name. And somewhere beyond the horizon, mortals would soon raise the first temple in her honor. Not to the humiliated goddess, but to the one who turned chains into charm, scorn into power, and heartbreak into art. Because beauty can be shamed, but never defeated. And as the night deepened around Olympus, one question whispered across the stars. Was Aphrodite's greatest revenge forgiveness, or the quiet mastery of every heart that dared to laugh at her? The thunder of Olympus faded behind her. Only the sound of the sea remained, soft, endless, familiar. Aphrodite had left the halls of the gods without a word, her laughter echoing faintly like perfume in the air. She no longer sought approval from those who had mocked her. She sought silence, silence deep enough to remember who she had been before the world learned her name. The waves opened to greet her, and the foam curled lovingly around her ankles. Doves followed her flight over the Aegean, their wings scattering light across the horizon. She landed upon a small island drenched in gold, its shores blooming with wild anemone. The mortals called it Paphos. She called it refuge. Here, the goddess of love became a mystery. No thrones, no judgments, only the rhythm of tide and wind. She built her sanctuary not of marble, but of coral and shell, letting the sea shape its walls. Each night, the moon laid a silver path upon the water leading straight to her temple. Each dawn, fishermen left offerings of honey and wine at the water's edge, whispering her name as though afraid it might vanish in sunlight. Aphrodite watched them with quiet fascination. These mortals, fragile as glass and fierce as fire, prayed not for glory or gold, but for connection. A husband begging for his wife's return, a maiden pleading that her love be seen, a widow weeping to forget. Every voice carried the same ache, the same hunger that pulsed through the goddess herself. She began to answer their prayers in ways both subtle and profound. A wind that changed a ship's course, a dream that healed resentment, a rose that bloomed on a lover's grave. The island soon became known as the heart of the sea, a place where wishes breathed. Priestesses gathered beneath her temple's arches. They dressed in white linen, their arms marked with small spiral tattoos, the symbol of eternal return. They danced barefoot through petals of myrtle, singing of birth, loss, and reunion. Torches lined the coast, glowing like stars fallen to earth. The rituals were not of conquest or sacrifice, but of remembrance. Each act of devotion whispered the same truth. Love is not given, it is discovered. But even paradise carries its own storms. As her worship spread, men sought to claim her favor for war, for dominion, for vanity. They offered gold instead of devotion, expecting power instead of peace. Aphrodite, in her sanctuary, felt the tide of greed rising. She realized that love's reflection could easily twist into possession. One night, as the torches dimmed, she stood at the edge of the sea and spoke to the waves. "I was born from your foam," she said, "but you gave me more than life. You gave me contrast. Beauty must know ugliness. Love must know loss, else both are empty." The sea replied in whispers that lapped at her feet. From its voice came memory, the severing of Uranus, the laughter of the gods, the shame and triumph she had endured. Each memory shimmered before her like a wave cresting then falling, breaking, becoming new again. When morning came, she walked among her priestesses and said, "Teach them not that I am perfection, but that I am reflection. When they look upon another with gentleness, they worship me." Thus began the first philosophy of love, the belief that the divine was not above men but within them. Sculptors would later carve this teaching into marble. Poets would dress it in verse. But here, on this quiet island, it was simply truth, spoken between breaths of salt and wind. Aphrodite looked upon the horizon. Somewhere beyond it, Zeus plotted, Ares brooded, Hephaestus hammered. Yet none of them mattered in this moment. Here she was not a wife, nor a scandal, nor a goddess chained to judgment. She was beginning again. Still, the sea shimmered with omens. The wind carried a scent of iron and smoke. War was never far from love. Soon, the prayers reaching her temple would change. No longer would mortals ask for gentle affection. They would beg for victory, vengeance, possession. And once more, Aphrodite would learn that devotion, too, has its shadows. As twilight painted the island in amber light, she whispered to the sea, "Let them come, let them love, let them suffer. Through them, I will understand what I was born to be." The waves rose in silent promise, and the goddess closed her eyes, feeling the pulse of humanity beating like a second heart within her own. Was the island her sanctuary, or the stage for her next temptation? The island of Paphos slept under a curtain of mist. The air smelled of salt and crushed petals. Aphrodite sat beside the sea, watching her reflection ripple with the tide, a face both mortal and divine. For a moment, she did not recognize herself. Was this the goddess who once shook Olympus, or simply a woman trying to understand why love always demanded pain? From across the temple courtyard, the young priestess Kalyanira approached, carrying a polished disc of bronze. "My lady," she said softly, "a mirror forged by the island's artisans. They beg that you bless it." Aphrodite accepted the gift. The mirror gleamed like liquid fire, its edge carved with roses and shells. She lifted it and gazed within. Her reflection shimmered, flawless, eternal. But as the sea breeze shifted, something strange happened. Her reflection smiled back without her. She lowered the mirror quickly, startled. The priestess bowed and withdrew. Alone again, Aphrodite felt the unease linger. "Even my image defies me," she murmured. "What am I, if not even the sea can agree on my shape?" The mirror's trick haunted her. Each day she looked again, and each time the reflection seemed to move just slightly out of rhythm, as though mocking her. It dawned on her that this was not a curse, but a truth. The reflection did not belong to her. It belonged to those who saw her, prayed to her, feared her. She was no longer one being, but many, 1,000 faces, all built from the eyes of others. That realization frightened her more than any god's wrath. Down in the villages, lovers quarreled under her statues, each blaming the goddess for the ache in their hearts. Men wept at her altars. Women whispered her name in jealousy and prayer. They believed she could heal them, yet she was the one beginning to fracture. Why, she asked the waves, do they think beauty brings peace? It only awakens hunger. The sea offered no answer, only reflections of clouds dissolving into foam. One evening, as dusk turned the water red, Aphrodite wandered into the forest that bordered her sanctuary. There, she met an old hermit, blind but smiling. He bowed as if he sensed her presence. "You seek yourself, goddess," he said, "but you will never find her in a mirror." "And where should I look?" she asked. "In what you cause," he answered. "Not what you are." She frowned. "And what do I cause?" "Longing," he said simply. "The wound that teaches the soul to feel." Aphrodite stood silent, letting his words settle like dust upon her mind. Longing, not love, was her gift to the world, a force that drives mortals to paint, to fight, to dream, to destroy. Was that not creation itself? When she returned to the temple, she placed the mirror in its shrine but never looked into it again. From that day, she began to see herself reflected in the hearts of mortals instead. A bride trembling on her wedding night, a soldier whispering a lover's name before battle, a mother cradling her child as if time could be stopped by touch. Every gesture of affection was a fragment of her divine body scattered through humankind. And with each passing day, she grew more powerful and more restless. For love, like the tide, is never still. It must rise and fall, flood and recede, until it finds its next shore. Aphrodite walked to the edge of the water once more. The moonlight danced upon the foam, and her reflection waited patiently, calm and silent. She smiled now, not in vanity but in understanding. "I see you," she whispered. "I see what you are, not perfection, but proof that everything beautiful carries its own sorrow." The mirror in the temple cracked that night. Some said it was the salt in the air. Others claimed it was the goddess herself, letting go of her need to be flawless. By dawn, the people of Paphos found roses blooming in impossible places, on stones, in tide pools, between cracks of marble. They took it as a blessing, but it was something deeper. The goddess had learned that to be loved is to be misunderstood, and she accepted it. The sea grew calm, as if approving her revelation. But far away, another current was forming. A golden apple, a spark of vanity, a new story that would test her power like never before. Because even gods must face the mirror of consequence. The sun rose red that morning, bleeding over the horizon like a wound that refused to close. It was the kind of dawn that promised change. Far from Paphos, the goddess of love felt the pull of destiny reach across the sea. A whisper carried by the wind, the faint clang of fate being forged in secret. At the edge of Olympus, the gods gathered for a celebration. The marriage of Peleus and Thetis, a union that would give birth to heroes. Every god was invited, except one. Eris, the goddess of strife, stood alone in the shadows, her bitterness coiling like smoke. In her hand, she held a single apple, golden, perfect, dangerous. Upon it, she inscribed 3 words that would undo empires: to the fairest. When she hurled it into the banquet, laughter turned to silence. The apple rolled across the floor, gleaming like temptation itself, until it stopped at the feet of Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Hera, queen of power, lifted her chin. "Surely the title is mine. I rule Olympus beside Zeus." Athena's eyes flashed, cold as a blade. "Wisdom is fairer than vanity." Aphrodite said nothing. She simply smiled, and every torch in the hall seemed to burn brighter. "Perhaps fairness," she murmured, "is in the eye that longs to see." The banquet dissolved into chaos. Zeus, unwilling to face their rivalry, chose a mortal to decide. Paris, prince of Troy, shepherd of Mount Ida. A single man to judge the beauty of goddesses. A mortal heart to measure immortality. When the summons reached her, Aphrodite looked out over the sea, the foam whispering at her feet. "So," she said softly, "love is to be judged." Her laughter was not cruel, only knowing. For she understood what the others did not, that to seek the title of the fairest was to expose one's deepest desire. the goddesses descended to the mortal world cloaked in splendor. Paris waited in a grove of olive trees, his hands trembling. Hera promised him dominion, the rule of nations. Athena offered glory, victory in every war. Aphrodite, however, said nothing at first. She simply stepped forward, her eyes catching the light like ripples of dawn. "Tell me, Paris," she whispered, "what is it you crave when no one is watching?" Power fades. Wisdom turns to sorrow. But love? She reached out, her touch barely grazing his cheek. Love can make even a mortal feel eternal. He swallowed hard. "And if I choose you, then I will give you the most beautiful woman ever born," she said. "Helen of Sparta, the face that will change the world." The choice was instant. The golden apple found its home in Aphrodite's hand. Hera's fury burned. Athena's pride shattered. And Eris smiled in the distance, her work complete. That night, as the stars shimmered above Troy, Aphrodite stood beside the sea once more. The wind whipped through her hair, carrying the echo of what she had promised. She knew what her gift would unleash: love that devours, desire that destroys. Yet she did not waver. "Let them learn," she said quietly. "Even the gods cannot command what hearts will do for beauty." Far away in Sparta, Helen slept uneasily. A strange dream touched her, of waves breaking, of a golden light calling her name. When she awoke, the world already moved toward ruin, though no one yet could see the path. On Olympus, Zeus watched the ripples of fate unfold. "She has chosen her battlefield," he murmured, "and it will not be fought with swords." In the temple of Paphos, the doves of Aphrodite took flight, scattering across the sky like omens. The goddess watched them vanish into the east, toward Troy, toward fire. She felt the pull again, that same pulse she had felt at her birth, when foam met blood. Love and war were circling once more. Was this the triumph of beauty, or its curse? The sea wind off Sparta carried the scent of salt and myrrh that evening, a fragrance that seemed to linger before great changes. Paris, son of Troy, had crossed the Aegean with Aphrodite's blessing. His ship cut through the waves like a blade through silk, the goddess's invisible hand steady on the wind. Every gust whispered the same name: Helen. In Sparta, Helen walked the palace gardens, unaware that destiny was already approaching. She was mortal, yet her beauty shimmered with the faint echo of the divine, a living mirror of the goddess who had promised her a way. She had been given to Menelaus, a good king, but her heart had always been restless. Each evening she watched the horizon and wondered why the sea seemed to call her. When Paris arrived, she felt it before she saw him. The shift in the air, the strange gravity that bends time between two souls who have not yet met. He disembarked dressed as a prince, but the eyes that met hers were those of a dreamer. Behind him, unseen, Aphrodite watched, veiled in mist. The goddess had not lied. Desire is a spell that needs no words. When Helen looked into Paris's eyes, the world around her blurred. She saw Troy in his gaze, gold towers, rose gardens, music echoing from marble halls. It was as if she had glimpsed a life stolen from the future, one she did not yet live but already longed for. That night, when the palace slept, the goddess entered Helen's chamber as a soft wind. "Do you still wait for love to come to you?" she whispered. Helen stirred, half dreaming. "I have everything a woman could wish for." "Everything," the voice replied, "except the fire that makes wishes alive." The window opened of its own accord. The torches flickered. Paris stood below, his face lifted to hers in silence. The goddess smiled. "Go," she urged, "and the sea will protect you." By dawn, the ship had vanished. Sparta awoke to an empty throne, a missing queen, and the first breath of a storm that would last 10 years. Menelaus's cry reached the heavens. "Bring her back," he roared, but the winds had already chosen their side. From her temple at Paphos, Aphrodite watched the sails fade into the horizon. The mortal world called it abduction, but she knew better. It was awakening, the moment when love stopped being worshipped and began to act. Yet for every heartbeat of pleasure, the goddess felt a tremor of warning. In the depths of her mind, she saw armies gathering, cities burning, heroes falling, all for a promise she had made in a moment of pride. Ares appeared beside her, his armor glinting like lightning. "You've done it," he said. "You've sown the seed of war." She met his gaze calmly. "I gave them a gift they could not refuse. And what of the cost?" "The cost," she whispered, "is always love." As Troy's harbor bells rang to welcome the foreign queen, Aphrodite walked along the shore, her reflection bending across the foam. For the first time since her birth, she felt something close to fear. Not for herself, but for what her power could no longer control. Love had become contagion. It would sweep through mortals and gods alike, binding them to choices they could neither undo nor forget. The waves crashed higher, as if echoing her thoughts. Foam sprayed across her face, cool and sharp. She closed her eyes and spoke to the sea. "Let them learn," she said softly. "Let them see that even the brightest beauty can cast the darkest shadow." And the sea answered with thunder from afar, the sound of oars, of armies stirring, of destiny beginning to march. Was this love's victory, or its first betrayal? The wind that carried Helen to Troy soon carried the scent of death. Across the Aegean, black ships cut through the mist like shadows of vengeance. The oath of Greek kings, sworn long ago to protect the marriage of Menelaus, had been broken, and now it bound them to war. From Sparta to Ithaca, from Mycenae to Salamis, men gathered, driven not by duty alone, but by pride, desire, and wounded love. In the halls of Olympus, Aphrodite watched the storm unfold. Below her, Troy glittered like a jewel poised for ruin. Her promise to Paris had been kept. Helen now stood upon the city's walls, radiant as ever. Yet the goddess could not help but feel the chill of consequence creeping through her veins. What had begun as a whisper of beauty was now a roar of destruction. Still, she descended to Troy, veiled and unseen. In the palace courtyard, Paris knelt before her shrine, praying for protection. "You gave her to me," he murmured. "Now keep her safe." Aphrodite appeared behind him, her voice soft as falling ash. "Love protects only what it can hold. Do not let pride loosen your grasp." He looked up, startled, sensing her but unable to see. "Will we win?" The goddess smiled faintly. "In love, no one wins, only those who endure." As the Greek ships neared Troy's shore, Aphrodite's influence spread like invisible fire. Soldiers dreamt of lovers left behind, of families, of fleeting touches they might never feel again. Even in battle, her power worked. In every heartbeat of hesitation, in every tear shed for beauty lost. When the first spear flew, the goddess turned away. The war she had sparked became too loud, too human, too real. Yet she could not leave. Her son, Aeneas, fought among the Trojans, shield gleaming like the moon. Through him, she would feel every pain of mortal fear. On the 5th day of war, a cry rose across the battlefield. Aeneas had fallen, wounded by Diomedes, a mortal favored by Athena. Aphrodite's heart twisted. Without hesitation, she descended onto the field, her radiance veiled in mist. She reached her son, cradling him as arrows fell around them. But Diomedes, bold beyond reason, lifted his spear again. "Even gods bleed," he shouted, and struck. The point grazed her wrist. A thin line of golden ichor spilled, glimmering like sunlight in dust. The goddess gasped, not in pain but in disbelief. For the first time since her birth, she felt fragility. The battlefield froze. Soldiers turned, eyes wide. The sight of the goddess wounded filled them with awe and terror. Aphrodite gathered her son, wings of light unfolding as she rose above the chaos. The blood that fell from her wound became flowers where it touched the earth, red blossoms blooming among the corpses. She carried Aeneas to safety, into the temple of Pergamus, and laid him upon the altar. "You are more mortal than you know," she whispered, "and yet, through you, something eternal will live." Then she turned to her own wound. The ichor shimmered upon her palm. She realized that even divinity could break when touched by mortal will. Love, she understood, was not invincible. Could be struck, scarred, made to bleed. Returning to Olympus, Aphrodite stood before Zeus. The other gods had already heard. Athena's pride burned bright, Hera's satisfaction colder still. "You see now," Zeus said softly. "You've given them your gift, but they wield it like a weapon." Aphrodite bowed her head. "Even love can be twisted," she said, "but it cannot be unmade." He studied her a long moment. "And what will you do, now that you've seen its cost?" "Continue," she replied, "for even from pain, beauty rises." That night, she stood once more at the edge of the heavens, gazing down at Troy. The fires below burned like constellations fallen to earth. She could almost hear the cries, the prayers, the desperate bargains whispered into the dark. A single tear fell from her cheek, turning to foam before it reached the sea. And in that moment, Aphrodite understood that her creation, love itself, was no longer hers alone. It belonged to everyone who had ever reached for another, knowing the touch might destroy them. She whispered to the wind, "Let them fight, let them love, let them learn." The night swallowed her words, carrying them over fields of war and seas of memory. Even gods, it seemed, must learn that love bleeds for all. Smoke coiled above Troy like a living thing. The cries of the wounded echoed between the marble walls, and on the highest parapet, Aphrodite stood cloaked in dusk. The golden cut upon her wrist had not faded. It pulsed faintly, a reminder that she had felt the weight of mortality, the sting of imperfection. Every throb whispered the same truth. Even love can suffer. From afar, the other gods watched. To them, the goddess's injury was almost blasphemy. Athena mocked, calling it justice. Hera smirked, but Zeus remained silent. In his silence lay the secret that none would admit, that pain, once known, could make a god more dangerous than before. Aphrodite descended from the battlements to the temple courtyard, where her son Aeneas lay resting. His breath had steadied, but the wound upon his side still glowed faintly where mortal iron had pierced divine protection. She pressed her glowing hand upon it, feeling warmth flow through him. "You must live," she murmured. "Through you, something greater than this war will endure." Aeneas stirred. "Mother, you bled for me. Then learn from it," she whispered. "The heart is not weak because it bleeds. It is alive because it can." Outside, the city roared with battle. The Greeks pressed their siege. The Trojans held the gates with desperation sharpened by prophecy. Yet amid all the blood and dust, something strange began to happen. Everywhere Aphrodite's golden blood had touched the earth, roses bloomed, small, bright, defiant. Soldiers paused mid-fight, startled by the sight of beauty blooming from death. Even Diomedes, who had struck her, felt his heart tremble when he saw the flowers grow around his feet. Love was not retreating from war. It was seeding itself inside it. In the still hours of night, Aphrodite walked the ramparts with Ares. His armor bore the stains of battle, his eyes flashing like embers. "You see," he said, voice low, "they pray for love, but what they truly crave is conquest. You and I are not opposites. We are halves of the same hunger." She turned to him, the faint wound gleaming on her wrist. "No," she said quietly. "You bring endings. I bring beginnings. But one cannot exist without the other." He studied her, both angered and entranced. "And which of us will outlast the other?" She smiled faintly. "Whichever one learns to forgive." They stood in silence, the fires of Troy painting their faces gold and red. The goddess felt the city's pulse, the fear, the longing, the prayers rising like smoke. The mortals worshipped her even now, whispering for mercy. And though her heart ached with the futility of their pleas, she answered them with the only gift she had left: compassion. When dawn broke, she left the city, veiled once more, returning to the shoreline where she had first emerged from the sea. The tide rose to meet her, wrapping around her ankles as if to soothe her wound. She spoke to the waves. "They have learned to love without knowing peace. Must that be my legacy? The sea replied with nothing but rhythm, the eternal ebb and flow, the pulse of creation itself. In that quiet, Aphrodite realized that her bleeding hand was no curse. It was proof that even divinity was part of the same cycle. Creation, loss, renewal. She raised her hand to the horizon, letting the sunlight catch the gold along her skin. Then let the gods mock, she said. I have felt what they never will, the cost of my own gift. Behind her, the temple bells of Troy rang faintly in the distance, warnings of another assault. The war would continue. The mortals would suffer. But through every tragedy, the seeds of tenderness she had sown would continue to bloom in defiance. Love was not peace, she understood now. It was endurance. And as she vanished into the sea mist, her voice lingered over the waves. Let them fight. Let them fall. I will rise wherever hearts dare to break. The golden wound upon her wrist glowed once more, then faded into light. Was this the goddess's punishment, or her transformation? The air above the sea shimmered as dawn broke, soft gold melting into rose. Aphrodite stepped out of the waves once more, the salt drying against her skin like memory. Her wrist had healed, but she could still feel the echo of pain beneath the surface. A phantom pulse, half wound, half heartbeat. It reminded her that she was not untouchable, and that realization changed everything. For days she wandered the edges of the mortal world, listening to the prayers whispered into the wind. They no longer called her only for beauty or fortune, but for healing. Lovers torn apart by war cried out for reunion. Widows begged for comfort. Soldiers clutched charms bearing her symbol and asked that their hearts not grow cold. She had given them passion, but now they begged her for peace. In that endless tide of longing, something within her began to stir. An ache that was not loneliness, but recognition. She knelt at the shore, letting her fingers trail through the foam. You ask for what even I cannot grant, she murmured to the mortals who could not hear her. You ask for love without pain. And then, she felt it. A spark, soft yet immense, blooming inside her like sunlight beneath water. It was as if the universe had breathed through her one more time. The foam rose higher, swirling around her like a cradle. From its shimmering depths came a voice, small but clear, laughter mingling with wind. When she looked down, she saw a child, golden curls glistening, eyes bright with mischief. In his tiny hands he held a bow strung with invisible threads and arrows tipped with light. Aphrodite gasped. Eros, she whispered. He smiled, tilting his head, as if he had always known her. Did you call me, mother? She touched his face, feeling warmth that no god had ever given her. You are love, she said softly. Not the kind that destroys, but the kind that begins again. Eros laughed, and his voice rippled through the air like music. The world changed with that laughter. Flowers opened that had never bloomed before. Rivers ran sweeter. Even the stars seemed to pulse brighter in rhythm with his heart. Yet as the goddess held him, she sensed a duality in his light. Your arrows will bring joy, she said, but also chaos. You will unite souls, but you will also divide them. He gazed up at her, innocent yet knowing. How else will they learn, mother? Without pain, how will they ever cherish joy? The question struck her deeper than any spear. She saw herself reflected in his logic, the same balance she had come to understand. Love's gift was never free of consequence. Its beauty was sharpened by its cost. As he grew, Eros wandered the world, unseen by mortals, his arrows shaping destinies. A queen's heart turned toward a foreign prince. A sculptor found perfection in stone. Two strangers locked eyes in a crowded marketplace and forgot their past lives. Every story of affection, every heartbreak, every song of longing carried his touch. Aphrodite watched him from the heavens, pride mixing with awe. Yet she knew that her child, like all her creations, would one day test her. Already, she saw hints of defiance in his smile, his delight in unpredictability, in giving mortals what they did not ask for. One evening, as the sky blushed crimson, he returned to her temple. "You have changed them all," she said, brushing his hair from his eyes. "Do you know what that means?" Eros grinned. "It means I've made the world less quiet." She laughed, a sound soft as surf against rock. "Then perhaps that was my destiny, to give the universe a heartbeat." But when Eros leaned against her, his small bow gleaming in the torchlight, she felt a tremor of warning deep within. He was not just love's messenger. He was love's will, free and wild, beyond her control. Still, she wrapped her arms around him and whispered, "Then go, my son, teach them. But remember, love is not a game. It is the echo of what made us divine." Eros kissed her cheek. "And what made us human," he added. Then he vanished into the wind, laughter trailing behind him. Aphrodite stood alone on the temple steps, her eyes reflecting both pride and fear. She understood what few gods ever would, that love, once given form, can never again be contained. The night deepened, the sea whispered. Somewhere far away, a mortal woman's heart began to race without reason, and a man who had sworn never to love again forgot why. Aphrodite smiled faintly. "So it begins," she murmured. "Even gods cannot escape their own creation." Was Eros her greatest gift, or the beginning of her next lesson? The night sky over Greece glittered like a net of fireflies, and within its quiet hum, Eros drifted unseen. His arrows had shaped destinies, binding hearts that never should have met, teaching mortals to weep and worship in the same breath. Yet one evening, he returned to his mother's temple, his golden bow slung carelessly at his shoulder, his smile gone. Aphrodite felt his presence before he spoke. "You've been silent for many moons," she said, her tone gentle but edged. "Where have you wandered, my son?" Eros hesitated. For the first time, she noticed uncertainty clouding his bright eyes. "There is a mortal," he murmured. "Her name is Psyche." The name itself seemed to stir the air. Aphrodite frowned. "Psyche, the breath of the soul. She is worshipped," he continued. "More than you. Mortals leave your temples empty to bring offerings to hers. They call her beauty divine." The goddess stilled. The air thickened, warm as rising storm. "They dare," she whispered, "to worship flesh over flame?" Her reflection trembled in the water bowl beside her. Perfect, eternal, and now wounded by comparison. For the first time since the laughter of Olympus, jealousy coiled within her chest like smoke. "Bring her to me," she commanded. But Eros's expression changed, defiance flickering beneath his obedience. "She is innocent," he said softly. "She does not seek their worship." Aphrodite's eyes flashed. "It does not matter. Her face steals prayers meant for me. And you, Eros, you will make her understand humility. Strike her heart with love for the most wretched man alive. Let her learn what it means to crave without hope." He bowed his head, but inside him something rebelled. The goddess turned away, satisfied, unaware that her son's silence was not surrender. It was the stillness before disobedience. That night, Eros descended to Psyche's chamber. The moonlight painted her skin with silver. She slept like a statue carved by time itself, radiant, unguarded, human. He lifted his bow, drawing one of his arrows, but when he leaned close, her breath brushed against his cheek. Her eyelids fluttered, and she whispered his name though she had never seen him. In that moment, his hand trembled. The arrow slipped. Its tip grazed his own skin. The god of desire fell in love. He vanished from her room, heart racing like thunder, leaving Psyche to dream of eyes she could not name. Days passed, then weeks. He returned again and again, watching from the shadows as she wandered her garden, unaware that a god's gaze followed her every step. When Aphrodite called for him, he did not come. Her patience thinned. She felt her temples growing quieter, her priests confused. Mortals whispered that the goddess had aged, that a new beauty had taken her place. Rage filled her like a wave breaking upon rock. She descended to the mortal realm disguised in mortal form. In the village square, she saw Psyche at last. A girl of impossible grace, her presence soft as candlelight. The people knelt before her, laying roses and seashells at her feet. Aphrodite's lips curved into a smile that hid its sharpness. "So," she said quietly, "they build altars to their own reflection." She returned to Olympus and called upon the fates. "If the soul of a mortal wishes to rival the divine," she said, "then let her prove herself. Let her earn her beauty through suffering." But what Aphrodite could not see was that her curse had already turned upon itself. For the one she had chosen as instrument, her own son, had vanished entirely. In secret, Eros carried Psyche away to a hidden palace woven of starlight and shadow. There, unseen, he spoke to her in the dark, his voice tender, his form concealed. "You must never look upon me," he told her, "and I will give you everything." And she, entranced by the warmth of love she could not see, agreed. Aphrodite, sensing the disturbance, felt the tether between her and her son weaken. "What have you done, Eros?" she whispered, gazing into the night. The answer came as a whisper of fate, cold and true. "You have made love mortal." The goddess clenched her fists, her reflection shattering in the pool. Below, in the world of men, her son slept beside a woman who would become the test of both their hearts. The war of the gods had ended, but a new one was beginning, the war between desire and the soul. Was this Aphrodite's punishment, or her mirror made flesh? The wind over the mortal mountains carried whispers of betrayal. Beneath the silver moon, Psyche slept in her hidden palace, the palace Eros had built for her with his mother's power, though Aphrodite did not yet know. The walls glowed faintly, alive with light that never dimmed, and every corner hummed with unseen life. Yet even paradise can become a cage when the heart begins to question what it cannot see. Each night, Eros came to her only after darkness fell. He spoke to her in the voice of the wind, touched her hand, kissed her eyes, but never revealed his face. "Trust me," he would whisper. "Do not look upon me, and our love will remain unbroken." At first Psyche obeyed. Her heart was full. Her days overflowed with wonder. Yet mortals, even when surrounded by divine beauty, ache for what they cannot understand. In time, her sisters visited her, consumed by envy. They saw her palace, her gifts, the richness of her life. "You say your husband loves you," they hissed, "but have you ever seen him? How do you know he is not a monster disguised by shadow?" Their words burrowed like thorns. That night, as Eros slept beside her, Psyche lit a lamp. The flame trembled in her hand. For the first time, she looked upon the face of her mysterious lover and gasped. He was not a monster. He was divine. His wings shimmered like mist. His skin glowed with light. But in her awe, a single drop of oil slipped from the lamp, falling upon his shoulder. He awoke instantly. Their eyes met, one filled with terror, the other with heartbreak. "You have looked," he whispered. "I had to know," she cried. "How could love be true if it hides?" He touched her cheek one last time. "Because mystery is the breath that keeps love alive. You have killed it with sight." And then he was gone. The palace dissolved into mist. Psyche found herself alone upon a barren hill, the dawn cold and merciless. Her sister's laughter echoed faintly in the wind. She fell to her knees. "Eros," she cried, "come back. Punish me, but do not leave me empty." Far above, in her ivory temple, Aphrodite felt the tremor of her son's pain. When she learned the truth, fury swept through her like a storm. "So this is the mortal who dared to wound my child," she said. "Let her prove herself worthy of his love." Psyche wandered the earth, seeking Eros. She prayed to every god she knew, but none would help her. At last, she knelt before Aphrodite's shrine, weeping. "Great goddess," she whispered, "teach me how to heal what I have broken." The goddess appeared in flame and fragrance. Her beauty was terrible, her smile cold. "You dare beg the mother of Eros for mercy?" "I do not beg for mercy," Psyche said softly, "only for the chance to make amends." Aphrodite studied her. The trembling hands, the eyes that held both guilt and courage. "Very well," she said. You wish to earn love? Then you will know its weight. She gave Psyche 4 labors, each one crueler than the last. First, the mortal was made to sort an impossible mountain of seeds. Barley, millet, poppy, and wheat, all by nightfall. Psyche stared at the endless pile, despair creeping through her veins. Then, from the earth itself, a line of ants appeared, each one small but tireless. They worked through the night until the task was done. When Aphrodite saw the sorted seeds, her fury deepened. "You have help," she said. "Then we shall see who helps you next." Her second trial was to fetch golden wool from the deadly rams of Helios. Their horns gleamed like fire, their rage unmatched. Psyche waited until sunset, when they slept, and gathered the wool caught upon thorns. She returned alive, her body cut but her spirit unbroken. Still the goddess was unsatisfied. The third task sent Psyche to draw black water from the river Styx, guarded by dragons. As she trembled at the edge, an eagle, sacred to Zeus, descended and filled the vessel for her. Aphrodite's anger now burned white-hot. "You persist," she said. "Then you will face death itself." The final trial was the cruelest. "Go to the underworld," the goddess commanded, "and bring me a fragment of Persephone's beauty, sealed in a box. If you fail, you will remain among the dead." Psyche descended into the shadowed realm, guided by whispers of compassion. When she returned, pale but living, she carried the box in her hands. But curiosity, mankind's oldest flaw, overcame her. She opened it, hoping for even a glimpse of divine beauty. A black vapor spilled forth, and she fell lifeless upon the ground. At that moment, Eros, healed of his wound, found her. He knelt beside her, tears bright as gold upon his face. "You have suffered for love," he said, "and in doing so, you have become its truest form." He kissed her lips, and the darkness lifted. When Aphrodite saw them reunited, her anger melted into something she had not felt in ages. Humility. "Perhaps," she murmured, "even gods can learn from mortals." From that day, Psyche was made immortal. Her trials became legend, her name a symbol of the soul's journey through pain toward light. And as Aphrodite watched them ascend hand in hand, she whispered to the wind, "So this is what love truly is. Not desire, but devotion that survives death itself." The goddess turned to the horizon, her reflection shimmering in the clouds. For the first time, she smiled without pride. Was Psyche's victory Aphrodite's defeat, or the proof that even the goddess of love could evolve? The day the soul became immortal, Olympus grew quiet. Even the winds seemed to pause, as though in awe of what had just occurred. A mortal woman, raised to the realm of the gods, not by power, not by bloodline, but by love that had endured suffering. Psyche stood beside Eros beneath the golden vault of the heavens, her eyes wide with wonder. Around them, the air shimmered with new harmony, a balance the gods had never known. From her throne of pearl and gold, Aphrodite watched. The old fire of jealousy still flickered somewhere deep inside her, faint but stubborn. This woman, this mortal, had done what even the gods rarely managed: to love without condition, to forgive without pride. Yet as she gazed at the two of them, hand in hand, she felt something break open within her. It was not anger, it was recognition. When Eros brought Psyche before her, the goddess rose. Her presence filled the hall, the scent of roses, the light of dawn, the hush before the tide. All the gods looked on, waiting for wrath, but none came. "Psyche," Aphrodite said, her voice echoing softly, "you have walked through shadow and flame, through fear and faith. You have faced the labors I gave you, not to destroy you, but to reveal what love is made of. And now, I see it clearly." The mortal turned divine knelt, her head bowed. "I never sought to rival you, great one, only to understand why hearts must break before they are whole." The goddess smiled. Not the mocking smile she once wore, but something gentler, older. Because love that knows no pain is not love, but illusion. A murmur rippled through the hall. Even Hera lowered her eyes. Aphrodite reached out and touched Psyche's brow. a glow spreading between them like sunrise across water. In that moment, something extraordinary happened. The bond between goddess and mortal, mother and son, envy and forgiveness, all fused into peace. Eros stepped forward, his wings unfurling behind him. "Mother," he said quietly, "you taught me that love is the strongest force in the world. You never told me it could wound so deeply." Aphrodite looked at him with a tenderness she had long forgotten. "And you, my son, have taught me that its wounds are sacred." The gods watched as the three stood together, the mother, the son, and the soul who had bridged them. Then Zeus himself rose, his thunder quieted for once. "Let it be written," he proclaimed, "that love, once tested, becomes divine. From this union, may all who love find strength beyond despair." He poured nectar into a cup and handed it to Psyche. "Drink and live forever." She obeyed. The taste was like spring after endless winter. Light blossomed through her veins, and in that glow, even Aphrodite saw her own reflection renewed. No longer as the jealous goddess of desire, but as something more human, more whole. The hall erupted in song. The muses sang of reunion, of tears turned to blessings, of hearts that had found their rhythm again. Even Ares, usually restless, stood silent beside the pillars, his gaze softening as he watched Aphrodite's face. Later, when the celebration had faded and the stars reclaimed the sky, Aphrodite walked alone along the clouds. Below, she could see the mortal world glittering with lights, the fires of villages, the candles of lovers waiting for dawn. She thought of Psyche's journey, of her courage, her mistakes, her forgiveness. For the first time, the goddess understood what mortals meant when they prayed for love. Not perfection, but meaning. A voice broke her thoughts. "Do you forgive her?" It was Eros, standing behind her, his golden bow resting lightly at his side. Aphrodite turned, smiling faintly. "I forgive myself through her." He nodded. "Then perhaps love has finally found peace." "Peace," she repeated, looking toward the sea.
No.
"Love does not find peace, my son. It creates it, for a moment, and then begins again." The wind lifted her hair, the scent of roses filling the night. Somewhere in the distance, the first dawn birds began to sing. The goddess closed her eyes, feeling the warmth on her face, and whispered, "So this is what it means to be divine, to be broken and still to love." She opened her palm. The faint scar on her wrist shimmered in the morning light, the mark left from her wound on the battlefield. It no longer hurt, it simply glowed. Far below, mortals would tell stories of this day, of how the goddess of love had made peace with her own creation, and how the soul of a mortal had reminded heaven what compassion truly was. In Olympus, Aphrodite turned away from the sunrise and walked toward the sound of laughter, the laughter of her son and the woman who had once been her rival. Her voice drifted softly behind her. "Let them remember this not as the end of envy, but as the birth of understanding. For every love story is born twice, once in desire and once in forgiveness." And with that, she smiled, the weight of eternity feeling, at last, a little lighter. Was this the end of Aphrodite's jealousy, or the beginning of her wisdom? The halls of Olympus glittered in silence. The laughter and songs that had followed Psyche's ascension faded into the distance, leaving only the quiet hum of eternity. Aphrodite wandered through her golden palace, past mosaics that shimmered with her own image, hundreds of faces, all her own, each slightly different. One smiling, one weeping, one defiant, one lost. She stopped before a great mirror, framed with mother of pearl and rose gold. It had been a gift from Hephaestus long ago, back when their bond was new, before jealousy and pride had driven her heart elsewhere. The glass rippled faintly, reflecting not only her body but the faint glow of something deeper, the mark of time. She stared at her reflection. Perfection looked back, flawless, timeless, divine. Yet she felt no peace in it, for in the eyes of the mirror, she saw not beauty but stillness. And stillness, she realized, was the one thing love could never bear. For centuries, Mortals would worship her for her unchanging grace, her immortal face untouched by sorrow. But she envied them, the way their faces told stories, the way they aged, the way their love transformed as time passed. To be mortal was to move, to be divine was to remain, forever adored, forever alone. She touched the glass. "What is the worth of beauty?" she whispered. "If it never fades, what is eternity? If it never learns to long?" Her reflection flickered, and for a moment, the mirror showed her something impossible. She saw herself not as goddess, but as woman. Her hair graying, her face softened by years, her eyes deep with laughter and loss. It was only a vision, yet it struck her with such force that she stepped back, breathless. The door behind her creaked open. It was Eros. His wings glowed faintly in the dim light, his expression curious. "Mother," he said, "you've been silent for days. The gods wonder what troubles you." She smiled faintly. "I have been speaking with my reflection." He raised an eyebrow. "And what does it say?" "That beauty is a promise," she said, "but also a prison." Eros frowned. "You sound mortal. Perhaps I envy them," she admitted. "They live, they change, they end, and in ending they become precious." He moved closer, his voice softening. "You gave them that gift, the ability to love precisely because they fade. Without you, they would never have learned to cherish." Aphrodite turned back to the mirror. "And yet I cannot share it." She pressed her palm to the glass, and the reflection shimmered again, this time showing fleeting scenes of the mortal world. Lovers growing old together, parents watching their children leave home, artists painting the faces of those they would one day lose. Each vision burned with an ache that was both pain and peace. Eros watched her in silence. Then, after a long pause, he said, "Maybe love is divine precisely because you can't have it. You can only give it." His words struck her like light breaking through cloud. She looked at him, her son, born from longing, now the god who spread her essence across the world, and saw the cycle completed. Through him, through mortals, her own immortality found meaning. She smiled at last. "Then perhaps I am not trapped, but reflected, in them, in you, in every heart that learns to love despite knowing it will break." Eros stepped forward and kissed her forehead gently. "Then you are everywhere, mother, and nowhere confined." When he left, Aphrodite stood alone again before the mirror. But this time, she no longer saw herself in perfect stillness. The surface rippled like water, showing faces, countless faces, mortal and divine, all carrying fragments of her essence. Farmers whispering to their wives before dawn, soldiers kissing lockets before battle, poets writing verses to the memory of someone they would never see again. Through their fleeting love, her eternity was reborn. She turned from the mirror and walked toward the open balcony. The wind carried the scent of rain, the promise of storms far away. The goddess of beauty closed her eyes and let the air touch her face. For the first time, she did not fear imperfection. She welcomed it. Below, the world glimmered cities, temples, the restless sea. The mortals she once envied were now her teachers. Through their brief lives, she had found her reflection, not in marble, but in memory. A single petal drifted past her, caught on the breeze. A rose from the earth below, its edges already fading. She caught it lightly in her hand and whispered, "So this is immortality, not to last forever, but to be remembered with love." As the petal crumbled to dust, she smiled. The goddess had finally understood the secret her mirror had always known, that eternity is not the absence of time, but the echo of hearts that continue to feel long after the moment has passed. And as night fell over Olympus, her voice lingered in the wind. "Let beauty fade if it must, for love is what remains." The sun rose blood-red over the hills of Cyprus, the same island where Aphrodite had first touched the sand. The waves whispered her name, carrying memories of foam and birth, of beginnings made from pain. But this dawn felt different, heavier, slower, threaded with fate. For on this day, the goddess of love would discover what it truly meant to love not as an immortal, but as a woman bound by time. She wandered the forest edges, barefoot and unadorned. No crown, no gold, no veil of divinity, only the pulse of the earth beneath her feet. The mortals had begun calling this land her sanctuary, yet she sought no worship today. The trees whispered stories of her grace, but she listened for something else, something faint and alive. Then she heard it, a cry, faint, human, newborn. Aphrodite followed the sound to a myrrh tree split open by the wind. From its wounded bark, an infant lay cradled in sap and petals, his skin glowing like moonlight through amber. The goddess knelt beside the child. "You are born of sorrow," she whispered. She knew the tale of Mira, the cursed daughter who had fled from shame, transformed into this very tree. And now, from that tragedy, new life had emerged. Aphrodite lifted the boy into her arms. His breath was soft, his eyes dark and bright all at once. "Adonis," she murmured, naming him for the word that meant Lord. But in her heart, she felt something different, beloved. As she held him, the goddess of the underworld, Persephone, appeared in a shimmer of shadow. "You cannot keep him," she said, her tone even but her gaze sharp. "Every birth from death belongs partly to me." Aphrodite rose, cradling the child closer. "He is too young for your world." Persephone smiled faintly. "All things are too young for my world, yet all come to it eventually." They stared at each other, the goddess of love and the queen of the dead, two halves of eternity, neither yielding. At last Aphrodite spoke. "Then I will make a bargain. I will care for him until he becomes a man. Then he may choose where to dwell." Persephone agreed, her eyes unreadable. The pact was sealed with silence, and she vanished like smoke in morning wind. Years passed. Under Aphrodite's care, Adonis grew into beauty that rivaled even her own. A beauty not soft or delicate, but alive, wild, dangerous. The forests bent toward him when he walked. Rivers mirrored him with devotion. He laughed easily, moved freely, hunted fearlessly. And the goddess watched him with a feeling she had never known, the slow ache of love unchosen. At first, she told herself it was affection, the pride of a guardian. But every glance lingered longer than it should. Every moment beside him blurred the lines between divine and mortal, between motherly care and longing she could not name. One evening, as twilight painted the hills in crimson, Adonis returned from the hunt. Blood streaked his hands, not his own, but that of a deer he had caught. The sight made her heart twist. "Why do you chase death?" she asked. "Because it runs," he replied, smiling. "And I want to feel alive." His words struck her like a mirror. She saw in him the same restless fire that had once burned in her, the same hunger that had led her to Ares, to the sea, to every choice that had shaped her. When he looked at her, really looked, something passed between them, an understanding deeper than desire, older than time. But before either could speak, a cold wind swept through the trees. The scent of pomegranate filled the air. Persephone appeared again, her eyes dark as winter. "He is grown," she said. "The bargain is due." Aphrodite's heart faltered. "He is not ready." "He is as ready as you were when you rose from the sea," the queen replied. Adonis stepped forward, his voice calm. "If I must choose, let me see both worlds." Persephone nodded. "Then so it shall be." And just like that, he vanished, half of his year claimed by the underworld, half by Aphrodite's world above. When he left, the forests wilted, the sea grew quiet, and the goddess felt emptiness she could not name. She stood on the shore, her reflection trembling in the waves. "Is this love?" she whispered. "To give and be left behind?" The sea answered with the faintest echo of her own voice. "To love is to lose and live again." Through the silence, the nightingale began to sing, a melody so pure it felt like a heartbeat. Aphrodite listened, tears glimmering like dew upon her lashes. The song carried both joy and grief, entwined like lovers in eternal dance, and somewhere deep within her, she understood. The gods could rule heavens, command storms, and shape the stars, but they would never escape the simple truth that love always demanded surrender. The goddess lifted her eyes toward the stars, where Adonis now walked between two realms. "Then I will wait," she said softly. "Even eternity can learn patience." The sea shimmered at her feet. Roses bloomed where her tears touched the sand. And far away, in the land of shadow, Persephone smiled faintly. For even the Queen of Death knew this story had only just begun. Winter fell heavy upon the mortal world. Frost glazed the hills of Cyprus, and the sea that once shimmered with Aphrodite's laughter grew silent. The goddess stood upon the shore, eyes searching the horizon as if she could will Adonis to return. But half the year had passed, and he remained below, a guest, a captive, a mystery in Persephone's realm. The bargain between the two goddesses had been simple: 6 months in the light, 6 in the dark. Yet to Aphrodite, every day apart felt like centuries. She had known desire, jealousy, even divine wrath. But this ache was different. It was patient. It was endless. In the underworld, Persephone walked beside Adonis through fields of asphodel, her pale hand resting lightly on his arm. "Do you regret your choice?" she asked. He shook his head. "Above, the world burns too brightly. Here, the silence lets me think. Of her." He hesitated. "Always." Persephone smiled, not with malice but with understanding. "Then you love her as she loves you, divided between worlds." When Aphrodite learned of his words, she felt both joy and sorrow. Love, she realized, had split itself across creation. Half of her heart bloomed in sunlight. The other half slept beneath the earth. One dawn, unable to bear the distance, she descended to the edge of Hades' gate. The air was cold enough to burn. Shadows moved like smoke along the black river. The ferryman looked up as she approached, eyes wide. "No living goddess crosses without leave," he warned. "I seek no passage," she said, her voice calm but trembling beneath its strength. "Only to see him." The river stilled. The underworld recognized her pain, not as intrusion, but kinship. It opened its gates. She found Persephone waiting, the queen's dark crown glinting beneath the torchlight. "You came sooner than I expected." "I cannot wait for spring," Aphrodite whispered. "Not when winter feels like eternity." Persephone studied her carefully. "You are love, yet you do not understand patience." "I understand longing," the goddess replied. "It is the price I pay for beauty that fades, for hearts that break." The queen sighed. "Then see for yourself what your love endures." She led her to the fields of shadow where Adonis walked among the shades. When he saw her, his eyes lit like sunrise through fog. He ran to her, and for a moment, the gloom itself seemed to retreat. "Aphrodite," he breathed, "I dreamed of your voice every night." She reached for him, but as her hand brushed his, the chill of the underworld crept into her bones. "You are cold," she whispered. "I am where life sleeps," he said softly. "But you are what wakes it." Persephone turned away, giving them the illusion of privacy. The two lovers stood beneath the cavern sky, neither daring to move, knowing every heartbeat was borrowed time. "I will not fight her," Aphrodite said. "You belong to both worlds now." Adonis smiled sadly. "Then I am cursed to always miss what I love most." She shook her head. "No, you are blessed to be loved in both worlds." When she returned to the surface, the frost began to melt. Grass broke through the snow. Rivers thawed and ran like veins across the earth. It was then that Zeus, watching from his throne, saw what the goddesses had done. He called them before him. "You have divided the year," he said. "You have turned time itself into love's rhythm. Let it remain so. When Adonis walks above, the earth will bloom. When he returns below, it will sleep. Thus shall the seasons turn forever." Aphrodite bowed her head, her heart aching but full. "So be it," she whispered, and so it was. Spring rose each year as her joy returned, and winter fell when she mourned again. The world learned to live by her sorrow and her hope. Flowers became the language of her patience, and snow the silence of her loss. On the first dawn of spring, Adonis rose again from the underworld, stepping into the golden light. Aphrodite met him in the meadows, her smile trembling like the petals that surrounded them. "Another season begins," he said. "Another chance to love," she answered. They embraced beneath the flowering myrtle, the cycle renewed, endless, sacred. Above them, the doves sang, carrying their vow through the ages. And so the world learned the meaning of renewal, that every ending is merely love's way of beginning again. Was this the mercy of the gods, or their most beautiful curse? The morning of Adonis's final hunt broke with strange stillness. The birds that usually greeted the dawn were silent, the forest heavy with breathless air. Aphrodite awoke in her temple, her chest tight, the faint ache of dread coiling beneath her ribs. The seasons had turned faithfully for years. His return, his departure, his promise. But this morning felt different. Even the sea outside her window seemed to wait. She rose and wrapped herself in a cloak of crimson silk, the color of life and warning. As she stepped out into the light, the wind shifted. It carried with it the scent of cedar and iron, and something else, something darker. Far from the temple, Adonis walked through the forest, his bow slung across his shoulder, his laughter echoing through the trees. He had grown into a man now, radiant and fearless. But beauty, the gods knew, draws envy as easily as love. And in the shadows of the glade, a jealous gaze followed his every move. The eyes of Ares, god of war, smoldering with the fury of a lover spurned. "Let her see what love has made her weak," Ares muttered to himself. "Let her learn that even beauty bleeds." He whispered to the wild boar that slept in the underbrush, a creature born of fury, its tusks glistening like blades. "Go," he hissed, "and take the boy's life." The beast stirred, its breath a cloud of steam, its eyes burning red. The forest trembled as it charged. Adonis turned, too late. The air exploded with sound. The boar struck him down, tusks tearing through his side. He fell to the ground, the world tilting into silence. The smell of earth and blood filled his lungs. He tried to rise, but his strength fled with the warmth of his body. Far away, Aphrodite cried out without knowing why. The goddess felt it, a shattering, deep and final. She ran through the woods faster than wind, branches tearing at her cloak, her heart beating like thunder. When she reached him, the sight froze her in place. Adonis lay still beneath a myrtle tree, his hand pressed weakly to the wound that bloomed red across his chest. The ground was soaked in color that did not belong to the earth. She dropped to her knees, gathering him in her arms. "No, no, no," she whispered, rocking him as if motion could rewrite fate. His lips parted. "You promised spring," he breathed. But winter came early. Her tears fell onto his face, tracing lines of gold along his skin. "Stay with me, please. The world is not ready to lose its light." He smiled faintly, even as his eyes dimmed. "Then let it remember." And with that, his body stilled. The forest held its breath. Even the wind dared not move. For a long time, Aphrodite said nothing. Then she pressed her hand to his wound. Her golden ichor mixed with his mortal blood, sinking into the earth. "If I cannot keep you," she whispered, "then let the world keep what remains." From the soil beneath them, something began to stir. A stem, green and trembling, pushing through the crimson dirt. It grew rapidly, unfurling in the space between life and death. When it blossomed, its petals were red as his blood, its scent both sweet and sorrowful. The first rose.
Aphrodite staar het at 'n trougertiaars. So bout hy wil alwys bloem from los se syd soft lei. So taat wanneer vervolg het wat love kosts. Se lifte te flower aan plaat het ipon Adonis chest. Sleep my beloof het. Te jaarte wil remember ou better tante gods everkeld. Te skies broke open abo vir her. Rainval en torrents, mingling wit hertiaars, wassing te ground klean bid never erasing te crimsonstein beneaat. Te godes rose slooflei, her govenia vy witte water, her is hollow witte inderstande. From dat hy voorwaard, se walke different lei softer, slower. Herbouty no longer soene onlei witte radianse bid witte grief. Mortals wo praai toe begin toe notiese dat Tyroses Caritorns harper dan bevore as touge each bloem was born of bote pleasure aan pijn. Antwen spring returnet, te fields erupted witte red, each flower aan memorie, each betal a promise. Te mortals call it te Siason of Adonis, wen lofe aan die te kiss het aan made piate voor avele. On Olympus even Ares wat het in se lense. Te Victoria het houget het climate had bekome her eternal symbol. Te godes of lofe had ter net tragedie in te worship. Dat nigget, Aphrodite knelt by te Sia, letting te wafes was haar handskleen. I innerstand nog, se wesbereid. Lofe is not immortaliteit. It is surrender to choice to keep feeling, even after the world has taken everything. The stars above flicker het brichter, asof boving to her realisation. And from the form that touched her feet, a whisperrose, he will return. Every season. Trouge every flower. Aphrodite's melet trouge haar tears. Ten lofe neverdies se side. Het onleid hanges vorm. Was Adonis theater herpinissement oorloof is eternal rebirte. Te world moefet ontbid te achu of Adonis theater klink toe te eerlijke parfume. Te jaar te remember het hem each spring, crimson petals blooming from te soul were his bloed had.
Fallen, each flower a whisper of love's resilience. And though mortals celebrated the season as renewal, Aphrodite knew it for what it was. The return of pain that never truly faded. Yet from that sorrow came something new, a pattern, an invisible thread that began to weave its way through hearts across the world. Lovers who had never met found themselves drawn together by strange coincidence. Strangers shared glances that lingered longer than reason. Empires rose and fell not only from conquest, but from desire. The mortals began to sense it, that unseen gravity between souls, and they named it the law of attraction, though they did not know it was Aphrodite's will. The goddess watched from her temple atop Cyprus as offerings flooded her altars. Seashells filled with honey, strings of pearls, letters written in trembling hands. But she no longer demanded devotion through fear or beauty. She had learned too deeply from loss. Now, she watched how the world loved without her command. Two mortals stood out to her one evening. A young woman who wove cloth by moonlight and a fisherman who sang to the tide. They had never met, yet every night their voices echoed across the waves. One sang, the other hummed in reply. Neither knew the other's name, but the goddess smiled. "Let them find each other," she whispered, and the tide rose higher, carrying the fisherman's boat closer to the shore where the woman waited. When they met, they did not speak at first. They simply stood, hearts trembling with the strange recognition of souls that had always known each other. Aphrodite turned away, content. "So," she murmured, "even mortals understand what binds the universe, the pull between longing and fulfillment." From that day, her temples changed. Worship became quieter, softer. Instead of grand sacrifices, lovers came to leave symbols of their promises. Rings, locks of hair, fragments of song. The air within her sanctuaries no longer smelled of smoke and sacrifice but of roses and salt. Love, once worshipped as a storm, had become a current, constant, invisible, inevitable. Still, not all who prayed to her did so with joy. Some begged her to end their longing, to break the spell of unreturned affection. Others cursed her for making them desire what they could never possess. Aphrodite listened to them all, for she had once known that ache herself. One night, she appeared to a lonely shepherd who cried beneath her statue. "Why do you weep, child?" she asked, her voice soft as twilight. "Because I love what does not love me back," he said, staring at the ground. She knelt beside him. "Then you love purely," she replied. "For true love is not possession, it is gravity. You cannot own the stars, yet they still pull your tides." He looked up, tears glistening. "Then why does it hurt?" "Because you are alive," she said, "and every living thing aches toward what it desires." She vanished, leaving the shepherd with silence, and a strange peace that filled the hollow her words had left. Aphrodite returned to her temple, standing before the great mirror of gold. For centuries she had wondered whether beauty was a gift or a weapon. Now she understood it was neither. It was a law like the tides, a force that simply was. She could not command it, only honor it. The goddess lifted her hand and traced a spiral upon the mirror's surface, the eternal symbol of return. "So this is how the universe breathes," she whispered. "Attraction and release, life and loss, ebb and flow." Outside, the waves crashed against the cliffs of Cyprus, each one rising to meet the sky before falling back into the sea. Every crest was a heartbeat, every retreat a sigh. The mortals would one day give her law new names: fate, magnetism, destiny. But all were shadows of the same truth. Love was not granted by gods. It was built into the fabric of creation, the rhythm that kept the stars turning and the hearts of mortals beating. And as the goddess watched lovers meet beneath her moonlight, she smiled, whispering to herself, "I no longer rule love. I guard its rhythm. I am not the command, but the current." The air shimmered around her, soft and golden. The sound of Adonis's laughter seemed to echo faintly in the waves below. She closed her eyes and let it carry her, the music of memory folding into the pulse of eternity. Because even in immortality, she knew the truth. Attraction was not control. It was surrender to something greater than gods or time. Was Aphrodite finally free? Or had she simply learned to live within the pull of her own creation? The island of Cyprus slept under a velvet sky when Pygmalion first dreamed of her. A mortal sculptor, known for his skill but cursed with loneliness, he spent his nights shaping marble into visions of perfection. Yet none of them ever satisfied him. He saw flaws where others saw beauty, emptiness where others saw form. "The flesh of mortals is too fragile," he would mutter. "Stone, at least, does not betray." One evening, weary of human imperfection, Pygmalion decided to carve a woman unlike any who lived or breathed. Not of flesh, but of ivory so pure it seemed to hold its own light. He began with the curve of the shoulder, the tilt of the chin, the softness of a gaze that did not yet exist. Days bled into weeks, and soon he forgot to eat, to sleep, to speak. When at last he stepped back, he saw her, the woman who would haunt his every breath. She was flawless, serene, tender, alive in stillness. He called her Galatea. The sculptor's friends mocked him. "You've fallen in love with your own creation," they laughed. But Pygmalion ignored them. Each night he returned to his workshop, lighting candles around her, whispering to the unhearing stone. "If only you could feel," he would say. "If only you could see what I see." Unseen in the shadows, Aphrodite listened. The goddess had wandered far from Olympus, curious about this mortal who sought love not in women, but in the silence of art. As she watched him trace the statue's lips with trembling fingers, she felt something stir, recognition. Here was devotion without lust, longing without possession. Here was the reflection of her own heart. One night, Pygmalion knelt before her altar, his voice breaking. "Goddess of beauty," he whispered, "you who breathe desire into all creation, grant me one mercy. Let her live. Not to worship me, not to love me, only to exist, if love itself wills it." The temple lamps flickered. The air grew warm. A scent of roses filled the room, and the statue's eyes began to glimmer with light. Aphrodite stepped forward, unseen but smiling. "You have asked not for possession," she murmured, "but for miracle. Then so be it." Galatea's lips parted with the first breath of life. Her ivory skin flushed with color. Her eyes, once empty marble, now shimmered with wonder. She looked around, trembling. "What is this?" Pygmalion fell to his knees. "It's life," he whispered. "You are alive." When he reached for her hand, warmth met his fingers. Tears filled his eyes. For the first time, he touched what he had only dreamed. Aphrodite appeared then, bathed in golden light. Both mortals bowed low, trembling. "Rise," she said softly. "You have proven that love, when pure, can summon creation itself. You carved not from vanity, but from longing, and longing, when untainted, gives birth to the divine. Galatea looked at the goddess, awestruck. "Why me?" she asked. "Because," Aphrodite answered, "every artist must one day fall in love with the soul they have yet to meet." She turned to Pygmalion. "Cherish her not as perfection, but as imperfection given grace. You shaped her from ivory, but now she will shape you in return." And then the goddess was gone. For years, Pygmalion and Galatea lived in quiet joy, their home filled with laughter, the scent of sculpted clay and blooming flowers. When their first child was born, they named her Paphos, in honor of the island where Aphrodite herself had risen from the sea. From their love, new temples were built. Sculptors began to believe that stone could hold spirit, that beauty could bridge heaven and earth. Art became prayer, creation became devotion, and in Olympus, Aphrodite watched from afar, smiling. For in Pygmalion's wish, she saw a truth even she had forgotten. That love, at its purest, is creation itself, the act of breathing life into something fragile, imperfect, and real. Yet, in the quiet of her temple, she also felt the faint ache of envy. For the goddess of love, who could make mortals tremble with a glance, would never again know the trembling of a first touch, the wonder of discovering love anew. She walked to the edge of her sanctuary, her eyes fixed on the stars. "Perhaps," she whispered, "the gods envy mortals not for their power, but for their limits. They love knowing it will end, and that is what makes it eternal." The waves broke softly at her feet, echoing her thoughts. The night smelled of myrrh and salt, of creation and memory. And somewhere far below, in a mortal home lit by candlelight, Galatea sang to her child a song of gratitude, a melody that drifted upward, reaching the goddess who had made it all possible. Aphrodite closed her eyes, letting the sound wrap around her like the sea. "So the sculptor dreams," she said, "and through him love dreams again." Was this Aphrodite's gift to mankind, or mankind's gift back to her? The morning light spilled over the island of Cyprus, turning the sea into molten gold. The waves that once carried Aphrodite to shore now reflected her temples, hundreds of them, rising across the land like pearls upon the coast. The mortals, in awe of her, had begun to build sanctuaries not from command, but from gratitude. And thus began the age of worship. Everywhere her presence touched, devotion bloomed. In Corinth, priestesses wrapped themselves in white linen, their hair woven with roses. In Paphos, doves circled above the temple dome, their wings glinting like shards of light. Even in distant lands, Syria, Egypt, and Rome, her name took new forms. Astarte, Ishtar.
Venu.
Yet beneath every language, her truth remained the same. She was the power that moved hearts, the mystery behind every longing gaze. From dawn to dusk, her shrines filled with songs. Lovers left garlands of myrtle upon her altars. Sailors offered shells for safe passage. Kings prayed for unions to seal their empires. The air shimmered with incense, heavy with honey and frankincense. Gold lamps flickered like stars fallen to earth. And though she was everywhere, Aphrodite's essence remained elusive. Her temples were not places of command, but mirrors reflecting the desires of those who entered. To the lonely, she appeared as comfort. To the powerful, temptation. To the faithful, revelation. Each saw her through the lens of their own longing, and she, in turn, learned from them. One evening, the high priestess of Paphos, old now, her eyes clouded with wisdom, approached the goddess during her twilight descent. "Great lady," she said softly, "you are worshipped more than any other, yet your temples rise from the hands of mortals. Tell me, why do they love what they cannot possess?" Aphrodite smiled. "Because the moment they try to own love, it escapes them. But the moment they surrender to it, they find me." The priestess bowed. "Then love is not power. It is the only power," the goddess whispered, "that cannot be commanded." In the centuries that followed, her worship became more than ritual. It became a way of living. Poets sang of her grace. Philosophers debated her mystery. Some saw her as divine tenderness. others as the spark that led to ruin. Yet all agreed on one truth. She was eternal because she was everywhere. But with worship came distortion. Not all who praised her understood her lesson. In some temples, her image became a symbol of indulgence. In others, of purity. Priests argued. Kings fought. Lovers swore by her name in both joy and vengeance. And through it all, Aphrodite watched, her heart torn between pride and sorrow. For what the gods had mocked her for, her beauty, her passion, had now become her dominion. Yet in that dominion, she saw reflection again of her own flaw. Mortals adored her as an ideal, but few loved her as truth. One night, she descended unseen among her worshippers. A festival burned bright in her honor. Torches flared, drums thundered, laughter spilled like wine. She walked among them disguised as a mortal woman, barefoot, her hair braided simply. She watched couples dance beneath the firelight, saw offerings placed at her statue's feet. Then, amid the revelry, she noticed a young girl sitting apart, her head bowed. "Why do you not join them?" Aphrodite asked, sitting beside her. The girl glanced up. "Because love has never come to me." Aphrodite smiled gently. "It already has. You are here watching, waiting. That is love's first form, the ache of wanting." Tears filled the girl's eyes. "Then why does it hurt?" "Because," said the goddess, her voice low, "everything real does." The girl looked away, and when she turned back, the woman beside her was gone. Only a single rose left behind, its petals glimmering faintly in the torchlight. The next morning, the priests found that rose blooming upon the temple altar, though no one had placed it there. They called it a sign, a mark of the goddess's presence. From that day forward, roses became her sacred flower, each petal a symbol of both beauty and pain. And as the centuries turned, her name carved itself deeper into the hearts of men and women alike. She was no longer merely worshipped. She was lived through every glance, every kiss, every heartbreak, every act of forgiveness. At twilight, standing upon the temple's highest step, Aphrodite looked out across the sea of lights, her temples glowing like constellations scattered across the mortal world. For the first time, she felt a strange peace. "Let them worship," she murmured, "for each act of devotion teaches them what I once had to learn. That love does not belong to the gods. It belongs to those who dare to feel." And somewhere deep in her heart, the goddess knew. Her temples would one day crumble, her statues would fade, but the force she embodied would never die. For beauty could be forgotten, power could be challenged, but love was the one faith the world would never stop rebuilding. Was Aphrodite's empire born from worship, or from the hearts that refused to stop believing in her? The temple fires of Paphos still burned each night, but not every flame was born of worship. Some were lit in fear, for though the goddess of love had taught the world devotion, mortals, as ever, twisted her lessons into warning. They began to whisper of those who defied her, those who mocked or rejected her, and how none escaped unscathed. The most tragic of these tales was that of Hippolytus, Prince of Athens, son of Theseus. He was young, beautiful, and fierce in virtue, but unlike other men, he refused the company of women, choosing instead to devote his heart to Artemis, goddess of the hunt and chastity. "Love," he would say, "is the folly of mortals. It weakens the will and clouds the mind." His words reached Olympus, carried on the wings of gossip and pride. When Aphrodite heard them, her smile faltered. "He dares to scorn what I am," she said softly. "He calls love a weakness." Eros, seated beside her, frowned. "Let him be, mother. Not all hearts are meant to burn." But the goddess's gaze darkened. "Every heart burns, my son. It only waits for the right fire." She descended to the mortal realm in disguise, draped in plain linen, her hair bound like that of a common woman. In Athens, she watched Hippolytus at the temple of Artemis, offering fruits and prayers, his face calm and untroubled. There was no longing in him, no hunger, no ache. He moved through life untouched by desire. And for the first time, Aphrodite felt not anger, but curiosity. How could one live without longing, without the ache that made mortals alive? Was this purity or emptiness? Still, pride demanded balance. He rejects me, she whispered. Then let him know what it means to be loved unwillingly. She touched the air, and the spell took shape, invisible threads weaving through the heart of Phaedra, Hippolytus's stepmother. When she saw him the next morning, something shifted inside her. A spark, sudden and unbearable. Desire consumed her like fever. Days passed. She tried to fight it, to pray it away, but the fire only grew. Finally, unable to bear it, she confessed. "Hippolytus," she pleaded, "I am cursed with love for you. Pity me, if not as a woman, then as one doomed by the gods." He stepped back, horrified. This is madness. Love should uplift, not destroy. Love destroys only those who deny it, she whispered through her tears. He turned and fled, leaving her broken. Aphrodite watched it unfold from the temple steps, the scene burning like reflection in her eyes. For a moment she hesitated. Was this justice or cruelty? Yet pride still held her tongue. Phaedra's shame became her undoing. She took her own life, leaving behind a letter accusing Hippolytus of violation. When Theseus found it, fury eclipsed reason. He cursed his son, calling upon Poseidon for vengeance. That evening, as Hippolytus rode along the sea cliffs, a monstrous wave rose from the depths. A bull, born of divine wrath, charged from the surf, spooking his horses. The chariot overturned. Hippolytus was thrown, his body broken upon the rocks. From the clouds above, Aphrodite watched, her breath caught in her throat. The satisfaction she expected never came. Only silence. Eros appeared beside her, his face pale. "Are you proud of this?" She could not answer. Together they descended to the shore, where Hippolytus lay gasping, his blood staining the tide. His eyes fluttered open. He saw her, not as goddess, but as woman luminous and sorrowful. "Why?" he rasped. "What have I done to you?" Aphrodite knelt beside him, tears falling like rain upon his wounds. "You refused to love," she said quietly. "I wanted you to feel what it meant." He gave a weak laugh. "Then you've taught me well." When he died, the sea went still. The goddess remained beside him until dawn, her tears mingling with the foam. The mortals who found the body later swore they saw roses growing from the sand where his blood had fallen. Small, red, defiant. On Olympus, even Artemis wept, though she said nothing. The other gods looked away, for they saw in Aphrodite something they feared: remorse. She returned to her temple that night and stood before her mirror. "I wanted him to feel," she whispered, "and now I feel too much." Her reflection trembled, not in vanity, but in grief. "Perhaps love cannot be forced," she said to her own image. "Perhaps it must choose its own flame." The mirror cracked. From that night forward, the goddess never again cursed a mortal for denying her. For the first time, she understood what it meant to be unloved, and to love nonetheless. And so, in the hush of her temple, where roses climbed the marble walls, Aphrodite made her silent vow. Never again would she turn love into punishment. Was it guilt that changed her, or at last compassion? The sun blazed high above the Aegean, its heat heavy and merciless. Across the plains of Cilicia, the marble columns of a mortal queen's palace glittered in the light. Her name was Cenchrys, and she was famed not only for her power, but for her beauty, so luminous that poets called her the second dawn. But pride is the mirror that blinds the heart, and one day, in the presence of her courtiers, she made the fatal boast that would reach Olympus itself. "Why do they speak so endlessly of Aphrodite?" she said, her voice soft yet edged with vanity. "If the goddess herself were to stand beside me, I would not tremble. In beauty, she is my equal, perhaps my shadow." The hall fell silent. The servants froze. Some tried to protest, but their words died in their throats. Above the clouds, a dove that had been circling the palace suddenly changed direction, its wings cutting sharply toward Olympus. The message had been sent. In her temple, Aphrodite heard the whisper before the echo faded. "My equal?" she repeated quietly. "A mortal queen dares to weigh her reflection against mine?" Eros, nearby, looked up from his bow. "You've changed, mother," he said carefully. "You do not punish mortals for vanity anymore." The goddess's gaze hardened. "I do not punish, but I must remind them." She rose, her steps silent, her beauty dimmed to mortal sight. When she entered the queen's palace that night, she came disguised, as a traveler, cloaked in silver dust. Cenchrys was alone in her chamber, gazing at her reflection in a polished bronze mirror. Aphrodite's voice drifted through the air, soft as music. "You are very beautiful," she said. The queen smiled faintly. "You see it, then?" "I see it," Aphrodite replied. "But tell me, when you look at yourself, what do you truly see?" Cenchrys turned, a spark of pride in her eyes. "I see perfection. I see what men desire and what women envy." The goddess moved closer, her presence making the candlelight flicker. "And when beauty fades?" she whispered. The queen laughed. "Then I will be remembered as the woman who rivaled a goddess." Aphrodite's eyes glimmered with something between sorrow and warning. "Be careful, mortal. The mirror can love you, but it can also lie." When the goddess vanished, the candles extinguished themselves. For a moment the room was silent, until the queen looked again at her reflection. It had changed. The face staring back at her was still hers, but no longer serene. Her beauty had deepened into something haunting, almost too perfect, unearthly. The servants who entered the next morning gasped. They could not meet her eyes without trembling. As days passed, her reflection grew more vivid, while her real body began to fade. Her skin paler, her eyes hollow, her voice thinner. She spent hours before the mirror, chasing the image that no longer matched her own. When at last she collapsed, she whispered, "Why does the mirror glow brighter than I?" Aphrodite appeared beside her once more, not cruel but solemn. "Because beauty without humility consumes itself," she said. "Your reflection became what your heart desired most, and what your soul feared most." Cenchrys wept. "Take it away, please." The goddess touched the mirror. The image dissolved into silver mist. The queen's tears fell silently. When she finally looked again, her face had softened. Lines of sorrow, traces of humanity, imperfection at last. Aphrodite turned to leave, but the queen called out, "Why spare me?" The goddess paused at the doorway. "Because I have learned that mercy teaches what punishment never can." Outside, the first storm of summer gathered on the horizon. Rain began to fall against the marble, washing away the dust of pride. From that day on, Cenchrys ruled differently. Her voice gentler, her laughter rare but real. In her temple above, Aphrodite watched. "They call me the goddess of beauty," she said softly to Eros. "But perhaps my true gift is imperfection, for only through it do they see themselves." Eros smiled faintly. "Then you've forgiven her?" Aphrodite's eyes grew distant. "I've forgiven us all." That night, as lightning danced over the sea, a single rose bloomed upon the palace balcony, a deep, dusky crimson unlike any seen before. The servants whispered it was the goddess's sign of absolution. And far above, Aphrodite closed her eyes, letting the storm's rhythm carry her into quiet thought. Even gods, she realized, must learn humility from the mirrors they hold to mortals. For every reflection of arrogance reveals the shadow of loneliness behind it, and love cannot exist in the absence of truth. Was this mercy Aphrodite's weakness, or her final strength? The storm came without warning. Clouds like black sails gathered over the Aegean, swallowing the horizon. Waves towered high enough to shatter masts, and thunder rolled across the heavens like the wrath of forgotten gods. A merchant ship, heavy with goods and gold, fought to stay afloat. But the sea, once a lover, had turned merciless. On deck, sailors shouted prayers into the wind. Their offerings to Poseidon had gone unanswered, and desperation clung to every word. Then, amid the chaos, one voice rose above the others, a trembling whisper from the youngest among them. "Pray to Aphrodite, not to the sea, but to the one who walks upon it," he cried. "For love, too, knows mercy." The others hesitated. To pray to the goddess of beauty seemed foolish in the face of death. Yet when the next lightning bolt struck the mast, splitting it like bone, they fell to their knees. "Aphrodite," they shouted, "Lady of foam and dawnlight, spare us." And the sea listened. Far above, from her temple on Cyprus, Aphrodite heard their cries, faint but sincere. She rose from her seat, her golden veil rippling like sunlight over water. "They do not love me," she murmured, "but they believe I can love them still." With a single step, she vanished from Olympus. The storm howled louder, then paused, just for a breath. Out of the mist, she appeared, barefoot upon the waves, her hair flowing like moonlit silk, her eyes calm amid chaos. The sailors, blinking through the rain, saw her silhouette and froze. She raised her hand, and the ocean obeyed. The wind softened, the waves sank back into rhythm, as if ashamed of their violence. "Why do you call to me?" she asked, her voice carrying through the roar of water. The captain bowed low, trembling. "Because we have nothing left to offer, only our lives." Aphrodite smiled, not in pride, but in sorrow. "Then offer not your lives, but your faith." She moved her hand once more, and a beam of sunlight broke through the storm, striking the ship's torn sail. The canvas mended itself as if woven by unseen hands. The mast rose straight again. The waves, now gentle, guided the vessel toward the shore. When they reached the beach, the men fell upon the sand, weeping with relief. The youngest among them gathered seashells and laid them in a circle, whispering prayers of gratitude. As they prayed, the sea foam gathered at their feet and formed a figure, not divine, but symbolic. A woman carved of light and water, her face serene. Then, as quickly as she had come, she dissolved into the tide. The captain spoke softly. "She saved us not to be worshipped, but to be remembered." From that day forward, sailors who survived storms began leaving offerings to Aphrodite. Not gold, but tokens of faith. Ropes braided with seashells, flowers cast into the tide, whispered vows of love to the waves. Word of her mercy spread like dawn across the islands. To the lovers she had once tested, she now became protector, a goddess who guided ships as she once guided hearts. The people began to call her Aphrodite Euploia, Aphrodite of the fair voyage. In the years that followed, her temples by the sea became sanctuaries for those who had lost more than wealth, those who had lost hope. Fishermen prayed for the return of their sons. Widows left roses on the shore for those taken by the deep. And sometimes, on the stillest nights, they swore they saw her, walking the foam, her veil trailing starlight. One tale spoke of an old sailor who, shipwrecked alone, found himself afloat on a broken board beneath a sky of endless stars. As he drifted, he saw her standing upon the waves. She bent down, touched his brow, and whispered, "The sea takes only what it must. You have more yet to love." When he awoke, he was on the shore, alive. Aphrodite returned to Olympus changed. The other gods noticed her silence. Once fierce, now she moved like the tide, patient, powerful, unjudging. Ares, watching from his throne, sneered, "Have you turned soft?" She met his gaze without flinching.
No.
"I have turned whole." The god of war said nothing more, for even he knew storms could destroy, but they could also deliver. And below, on the mortal shores, her legend transformed. No longer just the goddess of passion and beauty, Aphrodite became the guardian of devotion, the unseen hand that steered hearts and ships alike. She who once brought chaos through love now brought calm through compassion. And every tide that touched her island carried the same silent truth, that love, like the sea, can destroy or deliver you home. Was it mercy that tamed the storm, or love remembering what it was made for? It began, as many tragedies do, with pride disguised as celebration. The halls of Olympus gleamed with gold and laughter that night. The gods had gathered for a grand wedding feast. Peleus and Thetis, the mortal and the sea nymph whose union would one day shape the destiny of Troy. The air was alive with music, ambrosia scenting the clouds. Yet among the immortals, peace was always temporary. Uninvited, unwelcomed, Eris, the goddess of discord, drifted into the feast. In her hand she carried a single golden apple. Upon it were carved 3 fateful words, "To the fairest one." Conversations stopped. Eyes turned. Whispers rippled like waves across the marble floor. Eris smiled thinly and let the apple fall, rolling it between 3 goddesses seated near the throne. Hera, queen of the gods, Athena, goddess of wisdom, and Aphrodite, goddess of love. Each gaze burned with quiet claim. Hera rose first, regal and commanding. "The apple is mine," she declared. "I am queen of heaven, wife to Zeus, ruler of all." Athena's voice followed, sharp as a blade. "Wisdom outshines power. I alone deserve the title." Aphrodite said nothing. She simply reached for the apple, her fingers brushing the gold, her smile serene. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Zeus, uneasy, raised his hand. "This contest is beneath Olympus," he said, but his words fell flat. The 3 goddesses turned to him in unison, their beauty and fury enough to make even the thunder god retreat. So Zeus made a choice that would echo through eternity. "Let a mortal decide," he said. "Let the shepherd Paris of Troy judge who among you is truly the fairest." And thus the contest began. Aphrodite appeared to Paris not in splendor, but in sunlight softened by olive trees. He was young, unassuming, a man whose heart was simple but eyes perceptive. Hera came first, cloaked in gold, promising him power beyond kingship, dominion over all mortal realms. Athena followed, offering glory and eternal wisdom, the mind of a conqueror and the heart of a philosopher. When Aphrodite came, she said nothing at first. She simply looked at him, really looked until the world around them fell away. Then she smiled, faintly, as if she already knew the ending. "What can you offer?" Paris asked. "That rivals their gifts?" "Nothing that lasts," she said softly. "Only the one thing that makes all else worth losing." "And what is that?" "Love." The word itself seemed to warm the air. In that instant, he saw her vision. A woman of impossible grace, hair like burning gold, eyes that shimmered with longing. "Her name is Helen," Aphrodite whispered, "the most beautiful of mortals. Choose me, and she will be yours." The shepherd's heart pounded. He reached for the apple, trembling, and placed it in her hand. Aphrodite smiled, the smile that had moved mountains, calmed storms, and doomed empires. "Then it is done," she said. Above them, unseen, Hera's rage boiled, and Athena's eyes narrowed in prophecy. What had begun as a contest of vanity had become the seed of the greatest war the world would ever know. When Aphrodite returned to Olympus, she carried the golden apple not as a trophy, but as a burden. For the goddess who once believed love could heal would now learn how it could destroy. In the years that followed, she would watch kingdoms burn, fathers bury sons, and lovers torn apart, all because of a promise she made under an olive tree. Yet in her heart, she did not regret it. For every war, she thought, begins not with hatred, but with desire ungoverned. Still, the echo of that moment would haunt her. Many years later, when the memory of Troy still glowed like a scar across history, another contest was proposed. Hera and Athena approached her once again. "Come, Aphrodite," Hera said. "Let us see if you still dare call yourself the fairest." But the goddess only smiled. "No," she said, "not this time." They blinked, surprised. "You refuse?" Athena asked. Aphrodite nodded. "The last time I competed, kingdoms fell. This time, I choose peace." And with that, she turned and walked away. The others watched her go, silent. For the first time, they saw that her power was not in her beauty, but in her restraint. Later that night, standing by the sea, Aphrodite cast the golden apple into the waves. "Let mortals chase vanity," she murmured. "I have chased it long enough." The apple sank, swallowed by the deep. The sea shimmered for a moment, then grew still. Above, the stars seemed to burn brighter, tiny flames of truth flickering against eternity. And the goddess smiled, not from triumph, but from freedom. For love, she had learned, was not about being chosen. It was about choosing not to compete. And thus ended the contest that began with pride and ended in peace. Was this humility her redemption, or the wisdom that came too late? The sea beyond Troy was black that morning, a mirror for the smoke rising from its ruins. Once, the city had glittered like a crown between two worlds, Asia and Greece, but now it was a grave. The sound of weeping had replaced music. The laughter of kings was gone, their palaces broken, their statues melted by fire. From the high cliffs above the ashes, Aphrodite stood watching. The wind pulled at her golden hair, carrying the scent of salt and ash. Below, the mortals who had once called on her for passion and beauty now called for mercy. But none came. She had not meant for it to go so far. The golden apple had been only a game, a spark of vanity in the divine halls. Yet from that spark came a blaze that consumed 1,000 lives. She had given Paris the gift of love, and in return the world had burned. For years, she had protected him and Helen, wrapping them in illusion as the city around them fell to ruin. But illusions, like roses, always fade. When the final assault came, she had stood beside them, unseen. Paris, wounded and pale, reached for her as if for salvation. "You promised me love," he whispered. "I did," she replied softly, "but I never promised it would save you." When he died, the goddess felt a strange, hollow ache. Not guilt, something deeper, a wound in the fabric of her very essence. For the first time, she understood that even divine love could be used as a weapon in mortal hands. Now, standing amidst the echoes of war, she watched survivors flee the smoking gates. Among them was one man, tall, solemn, carrying his aged father upon his shoulders and leading a small child by the hand. His name was Aeneas, her son by the mortal Anchises. She descended to him through the haze, unseen by mortal eyes, her voice soft as wind. "Go, my son, do not look back. Troy must die, but you will carry its soul onward." Aeneas lifted his head, sensing her presence. "Mother," he whispered, "why must love always end in ruin?" "Because only through ruin does love remember what it was meant to protect," she answered. Under her invisible guidance, he gathered his people and set sail westward, toward lands unknown. The waves that had drowned fleets parted for him. When the storms rose, she calmed them. When doubt shadowed his heart, she whispered courage into his dreams. Every night, Aeneas dreamed of a burning city, and beyond it, a land bathed in morning light. "Italy," her voice would say, "there, love will build what war destroyed." And so, guided by her unseen hand, he wandered the endless sea, through storms and temptation, through despair and prophecy. Each island he touched would one day become legend. Each hardship would shape an empire yet unborn. In the heavens, Hera watched in fury. "Even now," she spat, "Aphrodite weaves her influence among mortals. She ruins one kingdom to birth another." Zeus only nodded. Such is her way. From beauty comes chaos, and from chaos, creation. When Aeneas finally reached the Italian shores, Aphrodite appeared to him once more, not as goddess, but as vision. Her form shimmered in the early dawn, her voice carrying both pride and sorrow. "You have done what none could," she said. "You have carried love through fire. From your line will rise a city greater than Troy, one that will worship not destruction, but endurance." Aeneas bowed low. "Then love can outlast war?" She smiled faintly. "It must, for love is the only thing that makes rebuilding worth it." And with that, she vanished into the morning mist, leaving behind the faint scent of roses and salt. Centuries later, poets would sing of Aeneas's journey, the founding of Rome, the city that rose from Troy's ashes. They would call it destiny, divine will, the work of gods. But few would remember the truth, that it was born from a mother's guidance, from Aphrodite's quiet redemption. In the ruins of Troy, flowers began to grow again. Among the stones and ashes, vines bloomed, wrapping the broken towers in green. Travelers who passed through would sometimes swear they heard soft laughter carried on the wind, a voice whispering, "Nothing is ever truly lost." For though the city had burned, the goddess had learned. Love was not meant to possess or preserve. Its truest power was to begin again. And so, through Aeneas, through Rome, through every mortal heart that still dared to rebuild after heartbreak, Aphrodite lived on. Not as flame, but as echo. From destruction came devotion. From ashes, empire. From love, legacy. Was this redemption, or simply the next chapter of her endless design? Centuries passed, and the winds of time carried Aphrodite's name across the sea. The Greeks who had once whispered her prayers now spoke of her in past tense, as memory, as myth. Yet beyond their fading temples, in a rising world of iron and marble, she found herself reborn. In Rome, they called her Venus. The city that Aeneas had founded grew vast and unyielding, its empire stretching across continents. Its people believed themselves descended from gods, from her. Her blood, through Aeneas, flowed in the veins of emperors. And so, Aphrodite's legacy lived again, reshaped by mortal ambition. Her statues now stood not only in sanctuaries but in the courts of kings. Artists carved her image into coins. Soldiers carried her sigil into war. No longer was she the goddess of lovers and poets alone. She had become the mother of empires. From the steps of her new temple, the priestesses of Venus watched senators bow before her altar. They offered her gold, pearls, and promises of conquest. But Aphrodite, the soul beneath the name, saw the difference. Once, mortals had worshipped her for the tremor of love's touch. Now they prayed for victory, for glory, for permanence. Love had become politics. One evening, in the shadow of her own statue, she appeared unseen among them. Her form cloaked, her beauty dimmed. A young Roman soldier knelt before her likeness, whispering a prayer not for victory, but for the safety of a woman waiting for him across the sea. His voice trembled as he said, "Let me see her again, and I will ask nothing more." Aphrodite smiled faintly. "You are what remains of me," she whispered, touching his shoulder unseen. "The gods change, but the heart does not." When dawn came, the soldier awoke with the sound of doves outside his tent. The battle that day never came. The enemy had retreated overnight. He returned home to his beloved, never knowing who had answered him. As centuries turned, poets like Ovid and Virgil immortalized her anew. Venus Genetrix, they called her, the divine mother, the giver of lineage, the pulse of civilization. Through their words, her story wove itself into law, philosophy, and art. She was no longer a goddess who tested hearts. She had become the ideal that built nations. But as her temples grew taller, her divinity grew quieter. In marble courtyards and gilded halls, Aphrodite often wandered unseen. She heard her own name, Venus, spoken with reverence, yet without tenderness. Her image had been perfected beyond recognition. The softness of her heart had been replaced by the hardness of empire. One night, she stood beside the great statue of herself in Rome's Forum, her gaze tracing the cold marble curve of her immortal face. "So this is what I have become," she murmured. "Not love, but legacy." From behind her, a voice answered. It was the spirit of Aeneas, her son, now long in Elysium. "Do not grieve, mother. You gave them what they needed. From passion they learned purpose." She turned, smiling faintly through her sorrow. "But at what cost?" "The cost all creators pay," he said. "To be misunderstood, yet remembered." As he faded, Aphrodite looked up at the stars above Rome. She saw her reflection in them, bright, eternal, untouchable. She had been worshipped as desire, reborn as destiny. But beneath every triumph, she sensed a hollowness that no temple could fill. Still, she could not deny the beauty of it. A civilization born from her lineage, an empire carried by her name. In their art, her story lived, painters capturing her rising from the sea, poets writing of her as the force that bound heaven and earth. In those moments, she realized something profound. Names change, but essence endures. Call her Aphrodite, call her Venus, call her love or beauty or hope. It mattered little. What she truly was, the unseen thread between souls, the ache that built worlds, would never die. She lifted her hand, and the stars over Rome seemed to shimmer brighter, forming a faint path across the sky. Somewhere, she knew, another age would come, one that would forget her temples, yet still whisper her truths through the lips of lovers, through the hearts of dreamers. For now, she stood watching the city that bore her child's name, Rome, the empire of passion and power, and she smiled. Her legacy had outgrown her body. Her myth had become the blood of men. Then so be it, she said softly. Let them build, let them conquer, for every empire begins not with war, but with the longing to be remembered. And as dawn rose over the marble rooftops, painting her statues gold once more, the goddess vanished into light, her name echoing through centuries as both curse and blessing. Was this her immortality fulfilled, or love wearing yet another mask? In the marble cities of Rome, beauty became law. The chisels of sculptors sang louder than prayers, carving eternity from cold stone. And among all divine figures that graced their temples, none was repeated more often than Venus. Her image, smooth, perfect, untouchable, adorned fountains, gardens, coins, and palaces. She was everywhere, and yet she was nowhere at all. The sculptors no longer called upon her with trembling hearts. They called upon her with precision. Their hands sought symmetry, not spirit. What once had been worship had turned into imitation. A young artist named Lucian stood one night before a half-finished statue in his workshop. The moonlight cut across the marble, illuminating the curve of her shoulder. He stared at it for hours, unable to decide whether it was beautiful or lifeless. "Why do you not come to me anymore?" he whispered. "You who inspired the greatest of them, why are you silent now?" The wind shifted, and the candles flickered. Behind him, the air shimmered faintly. A woman's voice, soft, melodic, ancient, broke the silence. "Because they no longer listen," said Aphrodite. Lucian turned, his heart stuttering in his chest. She stood there, not as statue, not as queen, but as something living, breathing, human. Her eyes glowed with the quiet sorrow of centuries. "I still sculpt in your name," he said, trembling. "I honor you. You shape my likeness," she replied, stepping closer. "But not my truth." He frowned. "And what truth have I forgotten? That beauty without emotion is hollow. That perfection without imperfection is death." She walked to the statue, running her hand across the cold marble cheek. "Once my name meant desire that breathed. Now it is frozen in stone." Lucian's eyes filled with awe. "Then tell me how to restore it." She looked at him for a long time, the faintest smile curving her lips. "Put a flaw in her," she said. "A crack, a curve, something human. Let her imperfection remind them that she once lived." Then, as suddenly as she had come, she vanished, leaving only the scent of sea air and roses behind. Lucian did as she said. He carved a faint imperfection into the statue's lip, a small asymmetry, barely visible. And when it was done, the figure seemed to breathe. People who saw it swore they could feel her presence, as if the goddess herself lingered in that flaw. News spread across the empire. The statue of Venus that felt alive. Crowds gathered, priests wept, lovers touched its feet for luck. And quietly, Aphrodite smiled from beyond sight, watching humanity rediscover the truth she had always known, that the soul hides not in perfection, but in the fracture. Still, time was merciless. Decades later, the empire shifted. Temples turned to ruins. Statues toppled under the weight of conquest. Lucian's masterpiece was shattered by invading hands, its fragments buried beneath dust and weeds. Yet centuries later, when explorers unearthed it from the soil, they marveled not at its lost grandeur, but at that small imperfection, the delicate, uneven curve that made it seem alive. They placed it in a museum, not a temple, and called it the Venus Restored. And so Aphrodite's image survived again, not as deity, but as art. She had become the eternal muse, reborn in every artist who chased beauty, in every poet who sought meaning, in every lover who saw divinity in a human face. One evening, in the quiet corridors of that museum, a woman stood before the fractured statue, her eyes glistening. "Who made you?" she whispered. "And why do I feel like you're looking back?" Outside, the rain began to fall. A single drop slid down the glass between them, mirroring the tear on her cheek. And though she did not know it, somewhere far beyond time, Aphrodite watched, her spirit alive in that moment of recognition. For she understood now that her temple was no longer made of stone. It was made of human hearts, fragile, flawed, endlessly rebuilding. As long as mortals could feel beauty, she would never fade. Perfection had ended her worship, but imperfection had made her eternal. Was this the goddess's fall into obscurity, or her final ascension into art itself? 1,000 years passed. Empires rose, fell, and faded into dust. The marble temples that once bore her name lay in silence, their columns swallowed by ivy and time. The world had changed, the gods forgotten, their myths scattered like ashes in the wind. Yet beneath that silence, something stirred. A whisper, a memory, a heartbeat of beauty waiting to return. It began in Italy, under the light of a new dawn. The people called it Renaissance, rebirth. Artists once again searched for the divine, but this time they did not look to the heavens. They looked to the human form. They looked to her. Painters studied the ruins, brushing dust from statues once offered to Venus. Scholars translated the old hymns of Aphrodite, marveling at the language of love that once defined an age. And in a small workshop in Florence, a man named Sandro Botticelli dipped his brush into paint and changed the course of art forever. He painted her rising once more, the birth of Venus. From the sea she emerged, as she had millennia before, standing upon a shell that glimmered like dawn. The waves curled around her, soft and inviting. The wind gods blew her to shore, while the goddess of spring waited to clothe her in silk. She was reborn, not in flesh, but in color, an echo of the ancient Aphrodite reimagined through mortal eyes. And when the people saw her, they fell silent. The same silence that had once filled the halls of Olympus now filled the galleries of Florence. They did not call her goddess anymore, but they felt her. In every stroke of the brush, in every fold of her hair, in every whisper of her gaze, love returned to the world. Aphrodite, watching from the ether, smiled. "So they remember," she whispered. "They remember what beauty feels like." For the first time in centuries, her presence stirred across the earth, not as idol but as inspiration. Sculptors carved her again, not to worship, but to understand. Poets compared their lovers to her. Musicians wrote symphonies in her name. Her myth had transcended belief. It had become language. But not all who painted her understood her truth. Some rendered her flawless, distant, a symbol of perfection unattainable. Others saw her sorrow, her fragility, the loneliness behind the grace. Botticelli, though, saw something deeper, the moment between innocence and awakening, that fragile breath between birth and longing. In that single painting, he captured her paradox, divine yet human, eternal yet fleeting. As the Renaissance spread, Aphrodite found herself reborn in countless forms. In Venice, she was carved from marble once more, softer, more humane. In France, she became the muse of poetry and the patron of romance. In England, her name inspired Shakespeare's sonnets. The goddess who once ruled the heavens now ruled imagination itself. And yet, she remained unseen. One night, in Botticelli's studio, as the painter lay dying, the candles flickered though the windows were closed. A warmth filled the room. From the shadows, a soft glow began to form. The figure from his painting stepping forward, her hair flowing like molten gold. "You painted me not as I was," she said gently, "but as I wished to be, gentle, forgiving, alive again." Botticelli, weak but smiling, whispered, "You were never gone. We only forgot to look." She touched his hand, and for a moment, he felt the sea breeze, heard the waves, and saw the horizon of a world reborn. Then she was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of salt and roses. When the Renaissance ended, the gods did not return to Olympus. They lived instead in minds and hearts, in every hand that sought to create something beautiful from chaos. Aphrodite had evolved from goddess to idea, the purest idea of love, longing, and creation intertwined. In her absence, mortals carried her forward. Every kiss, every poem, every act of kindness became her silent worship. She no longer needed temples of stone. She had found sanctuaries within souls. And so, under the glow of a reborn world, Aphrodite looked down from the realm beyond time and whispered to the stars, "I no longer rise from the sea. I rise from every act of creation. I am the memory that refuses to die." The tides below shimmered as if in reply. The same foam that once birthed her sparkled faintly under the moon, whispering her eternal name. For love once again had remembered itself, and in that remembering, the goddess of beauty was reborn. Was this her resurrection, or humanity's rediscovery of its own divine spark? The Renaissance had rekindled her image, but now came the thinkers, the scholars, the dreamers who sought not her face, but her meaning. As Europe awoke from centuries of silence, philosophy turned its gaze toward the heavens once more, not to worship, but to understand. And in that search for truth, Aphrodite, now called Venus, became the question no mortal could stop asking. What is love? The poets had sung her praises. The artists had painted her grace. But the philosophers wanted her essence. They spoke her name in echoing halls lined with parchment and candlelight, arguing not over her beauty, but over her nature. One of them, Plato, wrote of two Venuses, the earthly, who stirred the body, and the heavenly, who stirred the soul. One is desire, he said. The other is divine memory, the longing for what the soul once knew. Aphrodite listened from beyond the veil, intrigued. "Two of me," she murmured. "One mortal, one eternal, and both true." For even she knew that love wore many faces. The warmth between two bodies, the ache in a mother's heart, the yearning in a poet's words, all were fragments of her. And yet, the mortals argued endlessly about which form was purer. In Florence, a philosopher named Marsilio Ficino read Plato's words aloud by moonlight. "Love," he said, "is the chain that binds heaven and earth." Around him, his students nodded, their faces glowing with awe. Ficino raised his eyes toward the stars. "If God is unity," he continued, "then Venus is the force that brings unity into being, the bridge between form and spirit." Aphrodite smiled at that. For the first time, she felt seen not as ornament or temptation, but as something sacred, the pulse that connected all things. But not all understood her this way. In Rome, priests began to speak of her name with caution, warning against temptation, sin, and desire. The same passion that once built temples was now called dangerous. The goddess who had once been adored was slowly divided, praised in secret, condemned in public. Aphrodite walked unseen among them, her veil blending with the mist of dawn. In a chapel's shadow, she saw a monk praying, his hands trembling. "Forgive me," he whispered, "for the thoughts that stir when I see beauty." She touched his shoulder softly. "Do not ask forgiveness for what makes you feel alive," she murmured, her voice like wind through stained glass. "Ask instead to see beauty without fear." He lifted his head, but she was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of roses, lingering like a memory. Meanwhile, in Venice, a young woman named Isabella sat at her window, reading the new translations of Plato's Symposium. She traced the words, smiling softly. "Love is not sin," she whispered. "It is the beginning of understanding." She closed her eyes and felt something stir inside her, a warmth, an awakening. The goddess had found her temple once again, not in marble, but in the quiet mind of a human seeking meaning. Aphrodite's image changed once more. In paintings, she appeared clothed in light, not nudity, not as seductress, but as symbol. Her eyes turned upward, her expression calm, divine. She had become the face of intellectual love, the muse of reason and grace. Yet, as she watched from the space between realms, Aphrodite wondered. "Have they purified me?" she asked. "Or have they buried me under their ideals?" Her question lingered unanswered, carried on the breath of every thinker who tried to define her. For love, she knew, could not be contained by philosophy. It could only be experienced, lived, and broken by those who dared to feel. Still, she watched with quiet affection as mortals reached upward, building bridges between heaven and heart. She saw the spark of her ancient truth burning even in their restraint. They had stripped her of scandal, yes, but not of meaning. And so, the goddess of passion became the patron of thought. The same power that once moved kings to madness now moved philosophers to revelation. She looked down upon the scholars who studied her and whispered softly, "Write your treatises, debate your truths, but remember, love does not exist to be understood. It exists to remind you that you are alive." Her voice faded into the hum of the world, echoed in the lines of poets, in the ink of philosophers, in the quiet sighs of those who dreamed of something greater. For love, whether divine or mortal, had become the universe's oldest question, and its only answer. Was this the goddess's evolution, or humanity's attempt to think its way back to her heart? The wind over the Mediterranean had changed. What once carried hymns to Aphrodite now carried sermons of a new faith. The world that had built her temples was dying, replaced by one that no longer needed gods of flesh and feeling. One by one, her sanctuaries fell silent, the laughter, the prayers, the scent of incense fading into history. It began quietly with laws and whispers. The marble priests of Rome were replaced by men in robes of black and white. The word love no longer meant devotion. It meant danger. The goddess of beauty, once the pulse of life, was now spoken of as temptation. In Corinth, her grandest temple stood upon the hill, once radiant, now abandoned. The vines had grown thick around its pillars. The sea wind howled through its cracks like the ghost of song. Yet, even in ruin, it still drew hearts. At night, couples crept up the hill carrying candles, their faces half hidden beneath hoods. They dared not speak her name, but in silence they laid offerings. Rose petals, seashells, fragments of poems torn from forbidden books. Some called her Venus, others Aphrodite, but most simply whispered her. And sometimes, the candles flickered without wind. The air grew warm. The faint scent of salt and roses lingered, and they knew she was listening. Far across the sea in Rome, the old statues were torn down. Her likeness was defaced, her altars shattered. Yet even those who condemned her could not escape her pull. Artists still painted her in secret, disguising her as allegory, as virtue, as spring. Sculptors hid her face beneath veils of holiness, but the softness of her eyes betrayed her truth. A monk named Lucian, keeper of a small monastery near the ruins of Paphos, found an ancient text buried beneath the floorboards, a hymn written in her honor. Its words were older than his language, yet as he read, his hands trembled. She who walks upon the sea, whose breath stirs the heart of man, who dies and is reborn in every kiss. That night he could not sleep. He went to the shore, moonlight spilling across the waves, and spoke into the darkness. If you still live, show me that love is not sin. The tide rose suddenly, a whisper breaking across the foam. Love cannot sin. Only hearts can forget why they love. Lucian fell to his knees, tears spilling down his face. Then forgive us, he said. We have tried to make the sacred small. For a moment, the sea glowed faintly gold. Then, as quietly as it had come, the light vanished. From that night on, Lucian wrote poetry in secret, hiding his verses in the monastery's walls, verses that would one day be found centuries later, when humanity was ready to speak of her again. Meanwhile, the mortals who still remembered her kept her flame alive in other ways. Lovers began to exchange roses on the 14th day of February, whispering that the flower once grew from the tears of a goddess who mourned her mortal beloved. Others kissed by the sea at twilight, believing the tide carried her blessing. Aphrodite, unseen, walked among them, no longer golden, no longer adorned. She moved through their gestures, through their warmth, through every touch offered without shame. One evening, she stood before the ruins of her temple at Paphos. Only the foundation remained, washed by centuries of waves. She knelt, running her hand across the stone, feeling echoes of laughter and prayer still caught within it. "How fragile you are," she whispered to humanity. "And yet, how faithful. You bury me, and still you find me again." The stars overhead shimmered faintly, their light glancing off the water like tears turned to fire. In that quiet moment, the goddess understood her new form. She no longer needed temples of marble or priests in gold. Her sanctuary was eternal, hidden in art, in memory, in the hush between two heartbeats. And so, as the world turned away from her, she stepped deeper into its shadow, not to disappear, but to dwell where love itself hides when the world forgets its name. Some say that on still nights, when the moon is full and the sea glows white, a figure can be seen walking the shore, trailing light with every step. She leaves no footprints, only a whisper carried on the waves. "I am not gone. I am every secret act of tenderness you dare not speak." And with that, the last temple of Aphrodite did not fall. It simply moved inside the human soul. The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that only the sea could hold. A silence that seemed alive, breathing with memory. The waves lapped against the ancient shores of Cyprus, their rhythm older than language, older than civilization. The moon hung low, silver and solemn, casting light upon the same waters where Aphrodite had first risen from foam. Centuries had passed since her temples fell. Empires had turned to dust, her name rewritten, her statues broken. But the sea remembered. Fishermen who sailed too far into the night told stories whispered only when the lanterns were dim. They spoke of a woman seen walking on the water, her hair glowing like the dawn, her steps leaving ripples that shimmered with gold. Some said she was a spirit, others said a dream, but the oldest among them simply said, "She has returned." One such fisherman, an old man named Doros, had heard the tales his entire life but never believed them. Until one evening, as he cast his nets beneath the moonlight, the sea turned still, unnaturally still. He felt the air thicken, the salt sharper, as if the world had stopped breathing. Then, from the mist, she appeared. She was not as the poets had once described. No crown, no jewels, no divine radiance. She was simply beautiful in silence. Her eyes reflected the horizon, infinite and full of memory. She looked at him not as a god to a mortal, but as one soul recognizing another. "Do you fear me?" she asked, her voice calm, as if carried from beneath the waves. Doros shook his head slowly. "No," he whispered. "I've waited without knowing why." Aphrodite smiled, a smile both tender and tired. "The sea told me you would come. It remembers everything it ever touched." He glanced at the waters. "Then it remembers you." "Yes," she said softly. "And through it, I remember myself." She knelt, her hand skimming the surface. Wherever her fingers touched, the sea lit up with faint golden trails. "Once I thought I was born from this foam," she said. "But I was wrong. I was born from memory, from every act of love, every tear shed for another, every hope that refused to die." Doros watched in silence as the light spread outward, rippling like breath. "Why return now?" he asked. Her gaze drifted toward the horizon. "Because the world forgets easily. It forgets that beauty was never vanity, that desire was never sin. The sea calls me back when hearts grow too quiet." As she spoke, waves began to rise around her, gentle, luminous, as though bowing in reverence. The wind carried her voice across the water, where it mingled with the rhythm of the tide. "Every drop remembers," she said. "The first kiss, the first loss, the laughter of lovers who built kingdoms from hope. Even when they forget my name, they still return to me. because love always returns to its source. The fisherman felt tears sting his eyes. He did not know why. Perhaps because he sensed that he was not only hearing a goddess, but the very truth of existence itself. Aphrodite turned to him one last time. "Tell them," she said, "tell them that I am not a story. I am the tide that brings them together and the silence that takes them apart. When they stand by the sea and feel something they cannot name, that is me." Then, as the waves rose higher, she stepped backward into them. Her body shimmered like liquid starlight. Within moments, she was gone. Only her voice lingered, a whisper threaded through the surf. "When the heart breaks, come to the sea. It remembers what you have forgotten." The next morning, Doros's boat washed ashore, empty but unharmed. Inside lay a single seashell glowing faintly gold. The villagers said he had drowned, but when they held the shell to their ears, they heard a woman's laughter. Faint, distant, eternal. Years later, lovers who walked the same shore noticed roses blooming along the rocks, though no soil could sustain them. The sea foam around them shimmered pink, and at dusk, the water sang low and soft, like a hymn. And those who listened closely swore they could hear her words inside the waves. "I am not gone. I am every beginning that hides inside an ending." The sea, her first cradle, had become her final temple, vast, borderless, infinite. And though time moved on and the world changed again, one truth endured. Wherever the ocean touched, Aphrodite lived. For the sea remembers what mortals forget, that love, even when lost, never truly leaves. It only transforms, waiting to rise again with the tide. Was this her farewell, or the promise that she would forever return with every wave? The world no longer prayed to her name, but it still spoke her language. The goddess had faded from temples, yet her symbols lingered, woven into the gestures of lovers, hidden in the gifts exchanged at dawn, whispered in the silence between two beating hearts. Humanity had forgotten Aphrodite, but it had never forgotten love. It began with a flower. Roses bloomed in every corner of the earth, from gardens to graves, from palaces to the poorest courtyards. They were offered at weddings, laid upon tombs, pressed between the pages of letters never sent. Mortals could not explain why this single blossom carried so much meaning, why it symbolized both love and pain, passion and farewell. But the sea knew. The sea remembered, because long ago, a goddess had wept upon the soil where her mortal beloved died, and from that union of grief and devotion, the first red rose was born. Every time one bloomed, she was reborn with it. In Paris, a painter left a single rose upon his lover's window ledge before marching to war. In Kyoto, a poet carved the outline of a rose into wood, saying, "It blooms even when no one sees." In Istanbul, a woman placed a rose petal beneath her pillow and dreamed of someone she had lost. Across time and continents, without knowing why, humanity began to speak through roses, a secret tongue older than words. White for purity, red for longing, pink for remembrance, black for love that never dies. Each color a story, each petal a prayer. Aphrodite watched in silence. She no longer needed to appear in form. Her essence had become language itself. The mortals had built a new religion, unconscious but universal.
No templis, no pries, no idols.
Only gestures, fragile yet eternal. One evening, as twilight bled into the horizon, a young woman stood in her garden, scissors in hand, cutting roses by candlelight. Her lover had left her, carried away by war, and she no longer believed in gods. "Love," she muttered bitterly, "is just a word we invented to explain pain." A warm breeze stirred the air. The candles flickered, and the woman froze. A voice, soft, ancient, unmistakably kind, drifted through the leaves. "No," it said, "love is the pain you choose to keep." She turned, but no one stood behind her. Only petals scattered across the ground, glowing faintly in the candlelight. That night, she placed one rose on her windowsill. The next morning, a letter arrived. The war had ended, and her lover was returning home. She wept, clutching the rose to her chest. Somewhere, Far beyond the mortal veil, the goddess smiled. Through acts like this, Aphrodite lived again, not in worship, but in recognition. Every confession, every heartbreak, every trembling touch that bridged distance carried her pulse. She had become invisible, yes, but omnipresent. In Rome, they now called her an allegory. In paintings, she became symbol, not spirit. In poems, she was metaphor, not deity. But none of that mattered. She had transcended identity. She no longer needed to be believed in because she had become belief itself. And still, her symbols grew. The seashell, the vessel of birth and beauty. The dove, her messenger of peace and fidelity. The mirror, her eternal reminder that reflection was not vanity, but awareness. And above all, the rose, her heart, her signature, her immortality. One evening, a child picking flowers by the shore noticed the tide bringing in a single red rose, unblemished, floating upon the foam. He ran to his mother, shouting in wonder. "The sea gave us a flower," she smiled. Then someone, somewhere, must still love deeply. That night, as the tide receded, the rose drifted back out to sea, returning to the goddess who had sent it. Aphrodite stood at the edge of the waves, the moonlight painting silver across her face. She looked down at the rose in her hands and whispered, "They no longer speak my name, yet they speak my soul." She lifted the flower and let it fall, watching as it floated away, carried toward unseen shores. "Let this be enough," she murmured. "Not temples, not offerings, just the language that remembers me." And the sea whispered back, "It will be enough, because as long as roses bloomed, as long as hearts ached and hands reached for one another in the dark, Aphrodite would never fade." Her myth had become a code written into humanity itself, a grammar of emotion, a poetry of devotion. For even when forgotten, she remained the unspoken word at the center of every love story ever told. And when lovers handed each other roses, they were not giving flowers. They were giving the goddess back to the world. Was this the end of her worship, or the moment she became immortal in every human heart? Love, the oldest force in the cosmos, had always carried a twin jealousy. Where one bloomed, the other lingered, a quiet shadow just beyond the light. Even now, as Aphrodite's name was whispered only through roses and art, she could still feel its pulse in the world below. Every act of affection, every tender vow, seemed to summon its darker echo. She watched from beyond the veil as mortals loved and envied, adored and betrayed. The patterns had not changed. The goddess who once caused jealousy now learned from it. For every devotion she inspired, another heart burned in comparison. One evening, she found herself drawn to a small village on the edge of the Aegean. The air was cool, fragrant with salt and orange blossom. There, two lovers, Lycos and Selene, met by the sea each night, their bond pure and unbroken. Their devotion reminded the goddess of what love was meant to be. Fragile, selfless, alive. But beauty never goes unnoticed for long. Another woman, Thessa, watched them from afar, her heart twisted by envy. She had loved Lycos once, and could not bear the sight of his happiness with another. Each night, she whispered curses into the wind. "Let her see what I feel. Let her heart ache as mine does." Aphrodite, feeling the prayer rise through the air, hesitated. Once, she might have granted such a plea, she who had sent desire as both gift and punishment. But this time she did not. Instead, she descended quietly to the shore. Thessa sat among the rocks, tears streaking her cheeks, her voice trembling with fury. "Why her and not me?" she cried. "Why do you bless some hearts and break others?" The goddess appeared beside her, unseen at first, only a shimmer of gold upon the waves. "Do you believe I choose?" Aphrodite asked softly. Thessa gasped, falling to her knees. "You are the goddess of love. You made me feel this agony." "No," Aphrodite said gently. "I only gave you the capacity to love. What you do with it, that is your mortal power." Thessa's anger broke into sobs. "Then why does it hurt so much?" Aphrodite looked out to sea. "Because jealousy is love's shadow, proof that you cared, even when care became despair. It is the echo of what you once cherished. For a long time, the woman said nothing. Then, trembling, she whispered, "Can I be free of it?" The goddess smiled, sorrowful but kind. "Yes, but only when you learn to bless what you no longer possess." As dawn approached, Thessa rose and walked to the shore where Lycos and Selene met each morning. She left a single rose upon the sand, red, glistening with dew. Then she turned away, her heart lighter, her shadow fading behind her. Aphrodite watched her go, knowing the woman would never know who had guided her that night. But that was the way of things now. She no longer appeared to claim credit. She appeared to heal. Above them, the sky blushed pink with the coming sun, and Aphrodite spoke softly to the horizon. Jealousy does not make love unholy. It reminds the heart of its depth, of how fiercely it can feel. Across time, her words echoed through the hearts of lovers, shaping the quiet wisdom passed from generation to generation. That love without pain is shallow, that longing without loss is hollow, and that even the ache of envy carries the truth that one has lived deeply. In every jealous glance, she saw a plea, a desire not for power, but for recognition. Mortals did not envy love itself. They envied being seen, being chosen, being remembered. And that, she realized, was what she represented all along. Not beauty, not perfection, but the hunger to matter. Later, when the tide came in, the rose Thessa had left drifted into the sea, carried far beyond the shore. Aphrodite caught it in her palm, pressing it gently to her lips. "Even the shadow," she murmured, "belongs to the light." That night, as she vanished into the wind, the stars above the Aegean flickered faintly, reflecting her truth. Every heart that loves casts a shadow, and in that shadow, the goddess still walks. For even in jealousy, in its pain, its fire, its ache for what is lost, love continues to prove its immortality. Was this Aphrodite's atonement for all the envy she once inspired, or her understanding that the shadow was part of her light all along? The centuries rolled onward, and the name Aphrodite became myth, then symbol, then whisper. Yet even stripped of her temples and songs, she endured, not as a goddess in the sky, but as a current moving quietly through the soul of humanity. Philosophers, poets, and mystics began to call this current the eternal feminine, the divine thread that binds creation to compassion, body to spirit, chaos to beauty. They said it could not be worshipped, only felt. In the quiet dawns of history's turning points, she lingered unseen. She was there in the gentle hands of a mother soothing a crying child, in the courage of women who built nations with tenderness, not war, in the wisdom of lovers who forgave when they could have destroyed. These, she realized, were her new temples. But the idea of her, the principle of love, began to change once again. Mystics in Egypt, in Greece, in India, spoke of a sacred balance that the world had forgotten. The masculine force that builds, and the feminine force that breathes life into what is built. Without one, the other collapses. Without her, even gods become hollow. And so, she was reborn, not as a woman of beauty, but as the spirit of balance itself. In a monastery high in the mountains, a philosopher named Heron of Delphi spent his final years writing a single book. Its pages described a vision, a figure made of light, both fierce and gentle, standing between heaven and earth. This, he wrote, is the soul of the world. She holds the universe together not by power, but by empathy. He named her Aphrodite Sophia, wisdom of love. When the book was finished, Heron placed it upon the altar of a ruined temple, lit a single candle, and whispered, "May she never be forgotten again." Centuries later, the book would be discovered and read by mystics who saw in it not a lost religion, but a universal truth. Aphrodite, though unseen, felt every word like a prayer. "They no longer know my name," she said softly, "yet they speak my soul." Elsewhere, in the East, poets called her Shakti, the breath that drives creation. In Egypt, she was remembered as Isis, the eternal mother. In the hearts of the mystics of Europe, she became Sophia, divine wisdom. Every culture gave her a new form, a new name, but beneath them all the essence was one. And for the first time, Aphrodite understood that her story was not hers alone. It was the story of every woman who gave life, every man who chose compassion over conquest, every child who reached for beauty before understanding why. The eternal feminine, they said, could not be conquered because it was the pulse of the cosmos itself. Even destruction bowed to it, for only love had the power to renew. One night, standing upon the edge of the sea that had birthed her, the goddess lifted her gaze to the stars. They shimmered like 1,000 reflections of herself, scattered across infinity. "So this is what I have become," she whispered. "Not a name, not a face, a force." She saw her reflection in the tide, sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce, and smiled. "And perhaps this is what I was meant to be all along." As the wind wrapped around her, carrying the scent of salt and roses, her voice echoed softly across time. The eternal feminine draws us ever upward, through beauty, through compassion, through love's endless becoming. That whisper found its way into the words of the German poet Goethe, centuries later. And when he wrote of the feminine power that guides humanity toward salvation, it was Aphrodite who smiled from behind the veil, unseen yet ever present. In that moment, she understood her final truth. Her existence was not limited to worship or myth. It lived wherever love softened cruelty, wherever beauty healed despair, wherever humanity remembered that tenderness is strength. And though the gods of Olympus had long faded into story, the essence of the divine feminine endured, within every act of empathy, every creation born from care, every dream that chose love over fear. Aphrodite closed her eyes, letting the waves wash against her feet. She was no longer the goddess of love. She was love itself, infinite, eternal, unbound. And as dawn broke, painting the sky in gold, she whispered into the light, "I was never meant to rule them, only to remind them who they are." For that is what the eternal feminine does, not command but awaken. Was this the end of her divinity, or her final transformation into the heart of creation itself? The sea was calm again, its surface like liquid glass beneath the blush of dawn. The horizon glowed faintly gold, as though the world itself were holding its breath. Time had stretched so far that even the gods had become myths of myths, faint shadows flickering on humanity's collective memory. But for Aphrodite, time was not a chain, it was a tide. And all tides, no matter how far they wander, eventually return to the shore. She stood once more upon the edge of the Aegean, the same waters that had once carried her to life. Yet now, she looked older in spirit, her beauty calmer, her light softer. Her divinity had scattered across centuries, broken into countless reflections. Art, memory, love, loss. She had lived in them all. But now, she felt the ocean calling her home. The wind brushed against her, familiar and forgiving. "You've walked long among them," it whispered. "You have seen what even gods were never meant to see, the fragility of hearts that love despite knowing they will break." Aphrodite smiled faintly, "And I have learned that this fragility is not weakness. It is what makes mortals divine." She stepped forward. The water touched her toes, cool and luminous. Around her, the waves began to shimmer, echoing the faint heartbeat of the world itself. "Once, I rose from this foam," she said softly, "carried by the breath of wind and wave. Then I believed I existed to be adored. Now I return, not to be worshipped, but to be whole." The sea rippled, as if listening. As she walked deeper, her reflection fractured into thousands of fragments, each one showing a different version of her. The Aphrodite who guided Helen, the Venus who mothered Rome, the whisper in every rose, the echo in every love song, the thought behind every act of tenderness. Each reflection shimmered, fading gently into the tide. "I am not leaving," she murmured. "I am becoming." From far beyond the horizon, thunder rolled, not of storms, but of remembrance. The waves rose higher, swirling around her like silk. Foam gathered at her ankles, climbing as if eager to reclaim her. The goddess closed her eyes, and for the first time in eternity, she felt peace. On the shore, a young girl watched. She had come to the beach alone, drawn by a dream she could not explain. A dream of a woman wrapped in light, whispering through her heart. Now, she stood transfixed as that dream unfolded before her. "Who are you?" the girl whispered. Aphrodite turned, smiling. "Someone you've always known." And then she stepped into the sea. The foam surged upward, enveloping her in brilliance. For a moment, it seemed as though the sun itself rose from the waves. The girl shielded her eyes, tears streaming though she didn't know why. And when she looked again, the goddess was gone. Only the sea remained, endless and gleaming. But upon the water floated a single seashell, glowing faintly gold. It drifted toward the girl, settling at her feet. She picked it up, pressing it to her ear. Inside, she heard the soft rhythm of waves, and within it, a whisper. "When you love, you awaken me. When you create, you continue me. When you forgive, you return me to the sea." The girl smiled, her heart strangely full. She placed the shell against her chest, feeling its warmth. "Then you're never truly gone," she said. And far beyond sight, the waves answered, folding into light. From that day on, every dawn that kissed the sea seemed softer, every sunset more golden, as if touched by her hand. Sailors said the foam sometimes glowed before storms, guiding their way home. Lovers walking the beaches at night swore they heard laughter in the wind. Not loud, not haunting, but gentle, like the sea remembering an old song. In truth, Aphrodite had not vanished at all. She had simply gone home. For love, like the tide, is not meant to stay still. It changes, it retreats, only to return again in another form. And somewhere, deep beneath the waves, the foam still glows faintly, as if holding the echo of her first breath and her last. Because in every beginning hides an ending, and in every ending, the promise of rebirth. Was this her farewell, or the quiet moment before love takes new shape once more? The tide had stilled, the sky painted in soft amber light. The sea no longer raged or whispered. It only breathed, slow and eternal. From its endless horizon, a single shimmer of foam rolled toward the shore, curling and dissolving into sand. There was no form within it, no face, no figure, only memory. Yet to those who listened with their hearts, it spoke. Her name, Aphrodite, born of the foam, born of longing, born of everything fragile that dared to reach for something infinite. Her story had stretched beyond Olympus, beyond marble and myth, into the soul of creation itself. She was no longer goddess, nor legend, nor symbol. She was language, the human impulse to connect, to forgive, to love even when love breaks. And now, the sea spoke that truth back to the world. In a small coastal town, centuries after her temples crumbled, an old scholar sat by the waves reading fragments of ancient verse. His voice was rough with age, but the words trembled with reverence. She who rose from sea and sky, whose beauty teaches gods to feel, whose pain births tenderness, whose silence binds the world in longing. He closed the scroll and looked at the horizon. "They called her Aphrodite," he whispered. But what did the name truly mean? The sea answered in its rhythm. Each wave a syllable, each retreat a pause. Aphros, foam. Dite, born of foam. Born of the element that vanishes the moment it exists. A miracle of impermanence. And yet, from something that fragile came the force that outlasted empires. The scholar smiled, understanding at last. "She was never about the body," he murmured. "She was about the spark. The instant beauty appears and reminds us what it means to be alive." Far beyond his sight, the goddess listened. Not in form, but in essence. She had scattered herself across creation, her name now pulsing through every human heartbeat that dared to feel. She was in the eyes of lovers, in the sigh of forgiveness, in the child's first wonder at the world. "I was never born of foam," her voice whispered across the water. "I was born of longing, and longing never dies." Around her, visions rippled. Helen's laughter, Psyche's courage, Adonis's quiet death, Eros's first arrow, even the painters who had resurrected her with brush and light. Every moment of tenderness, every fracture mended by grace, became her scripture. She had been adored, envied, condemned, forgotten, and reborn. Yet through every transformation, her core remained untouched. Because love, she realized, is not perfection. It is persistence. It is the courage to rise again after being broken, to give again after being hurt, to hope again after being forgotten. And so, her myth closed not in triumph or tragedy, but in truth. Aphrodite was never the goddess of love as possession. She was the goddess of love as motion, unceasing, uncontainable, eternal. In the centuries that followed, her name would surface again and again, in poems, in art, in the way someone looked at another and saw beauty instead of flaw. Every time someone chose compassion over pride, creation over cruelty, she rose again from the sea. And each whisper of her name, Aphrodite, Venus, love, was not a call to the divine, but a remembrance of the divine that lives within. As the final light of day stretched across the horizon, the foam shimmered gold, then silver, then vanished back into the sea. But before it disappeared, a single word lingered in the air, carried softly by the tide. Remember, for that was her gift and her final plea, to remind mortals that they were not meant to conquer love, but to be transformed by it. The sea grew still again. The stars appeared, their light glimmering upon the surface like thousands of tiny mirrors. And for a moment, it seemed as if the whole world reflected her face. Not as goddess, not as myth, but as truth. Love was not her story. Love was her name. And through every age that followed, it continued to echo, softly, endlessly, like waves returning home. And as the last foam faded into the quiet sea, the story did not end. It only changed shape. The waters that once bore her birth still move through us. In every heartbeat, in every whisper of hope that refuses to die. Tonight, as the waves breathe against the shore, may you remember that she was never only a goddess. She was the reflection of all that lives and loves within you. Close your eyes now. Listen to the rhythm of the tide beyond your window. That sound, steady, endless, ancient, is her voice. Let it carry you toward rest, toward peace, toward the calm where longing meets stillness. And when you dream, may you find yourself standing once more beside that eternal sea, where love first rose from the foam, and where it forever returns. Until the next story calls, may the sea remember you, as you now remember her.